Welcome, true believers, to a journey through more than 60 years of Marvel's first family. Tonight, we're going to explore the complete story of the Fantastic Four, from their cosmic ray-soaked origins in 1961 all the way through to their modern adventures. This is a tale that spans decades of publication, countless dimensions, and the very fabric of the Marvel Universe itself. So settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind drift as we walk together through the Baxter Building and beyond. We'll move slowly and steadily through each era, each creative team, each moment that shaped Marvel's most enduring family. There's no rush here, no need to memorize every plot detail. Just let the story wash over you like the gentle cosmic radiation that gave our heroes their powers. Our story begins in the dawn of the Marvel Age, in the year 1961, when the world was caught between the excitement of the space race and the tensions of the Cold War. It was a time when science fiction seemed on the verge of becoming science fact, when rocket ships and atomic energy promised to transform human civilization. Into this world of boundless optimism and underlying anxiety, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby introduced four characters who would change comics forever. The Marvel Universe was just being born in those days, a place where science and wonder existed side by side, where a brilliant scientist could build a rocket ship in his garage, and where cosmic forces beyond human understanding waited just beyond the edge of space. It was a universe that felt both impossibly advanced and charmingly innocent, where the greatest threats often came from our own ambitions rather than from external enemies. Reed Richards embodied the scientific optimism of the era, a brilliant inventor and explorer who believed that human knowledge could solve any problem and overcome any obstacle. His mind was a cathedral of possibilities, filled with theories about dimensional travel, molecular manipulation, and the hidden structures of reality itself. But Reed was also a man driven by an almost compulsive need to push boundaries, to explore the unknown regardless of the personal cost. Susan Storm represented the best of early 1960s womanhood, intelligent, capable, and fiercely loyal to those she loved. She was Reed's partner in both science and life, though the comics of that era often struggled to fully realize her potential. Sue was the emotional heart of the team even from the beginning, the one who held them together when Reed's obsessions threatened to pull them apart. Johnny Storm, Sue's younger brother, was pure teenage energy given human form. He was hot-headed in every sense of the word, quick to anger and quicker to act, but also possessed of a fundamental decency that would mature into true heroism over the years. Johnny represented youth and possibility, the idea that even our mistakes could become sources of strength. And then there was Ben Grimm, Reed's best friend from college, a man whose rough exterior hid a heart as big as his famous orange frame. Ben was the everyman of the group, the one who reminded them all that for all their cosmic adventures, they were still human beings with human needs and human frailties. His transformation would become the group's greatest tragedy and, paradoxically, their greatest source of strength. The accident that created the Fantastic Four began with Reed Richards' impatience and ended with four lives forever changed. Reed had been working for years on an experimental rocket ship, one designed to travel to the stars using his own revolutionary propulsion system. The ship was his masterpiece, the culmination of everything he had learned about physics, engineering, and the fundamental forces that held the universe together. But Reed's timeline was accelerated by the pressures of the space race. The government was growing impatient with his progress, threatening to cut funding for his project and give the commission to someone else. Reed could not bear the thought of seeing his work taken away, his dreams of stellar exploration handed over to lesser minds who might not understand the delicate calculations required for safe passage through space. So Reed made the decision that would define the rest of their lives. He decided to launch the ship immediately, before the final safety tests had been completed, before all the potential dangers had been identified terrified and addressed. It was an act of scientific hubris that would have consequences beyond anything he could have imagined. Sue tried to talk him out of it, using all her considerable intelligence and understanding of Reed's psychology to make him see reason. She pointed out that the cosmic ray shielding was untested, that they didn't fully understand the radiation environment beyond Earth's protective magnetosphere. But Reed was too proud to listen, too driven by his vision to accept the possibility of delay. Johnny was simply eager for adventure, excited by the prospect of being among the first humans to travel to the stars. His youth made him almost immune to fear, and he trusted completely in Reed's scientific abilities. If Reed said the ship was ready, then it was ready. What could possibly go wrong? Ben Grimm had his doubts, expressed in his characteristically blunt manner, but his loyalty to Reed ultimately overcame his caution. Reed had been his friend since their college days, and Ben had seen firsthand the brilliance of Reed's mind. If Reed needed him for this mission, then Ben would be there, regardless of the risks involved. The launch itself was perfect, the ship performing exactly as Reed had designed it to. They broke free of Earth's gravity well and soared into the void between worlds, four friends sharing a moment of triumph that seemed to justify all of Reed's confidence. For a brief shining moment, everything was exactly as Reed had dreamed it would be. But then they encountered the cosmic rays. The cosmic radiation that struck their ship was unlike anything Reed had anticipated in his calculations. These weren't the predictable charged particles he had studied in laboratory conditions, but something far more exotic and dangerous. Cosmic rays that had been accelerated to incredible energies by forces beyond human understanding. Radiation that carried within it the very essence of creation and change. The ship's inadequate shielding failed almost immediately, and the four passengers found themselves bathed in energies that reached down to the molecular level and began rewriting the fundamental structure of their bodies. Reed felt his cellular structure becoming malleable, his very atoms learning new ways to bond and separate. Sue discovered her molecular structure shifting between visible and invisible states, her body learning to bend light around itself like water flowing around a stone. Johnny's metabolism was transformed into a living furnace, his body becoming a conduit for the nuclear forces that power the stars themselves. The cosmic rays didn't just change his cellular structure, they gave him a direct connection to the fundamental force of combustion, turning him into a being who could exist as both man and living flame. But it was Ben who suffered the most dramatic transformation. The cosmic rays reached deep into his genetic structure and triggered changes that were both more extensive and more visible than those experienced by his companions. His skin became rocky and orange, his body growing to massive proportions as his cellular density increased exponentially. He became a living testament to the price of scientific ambition. The crash landing was almost anticlimactic after the cosmic transformation they had undergone. Reed's malleable body allowed him to cushion the impact for his friends, stretching and reshaping himself to absorb the tremendous forces involved in their uncontrolled descent. They found themselves back on Earth, forever changed by their brief journey to the edge of space. The immediate aftermath was a mixture of wonder and horror as they discovered the extent of their transformations. Reed could stretch his body like rubber, extending his limbs across impossible distances and reshaping himself at will. Sue could turn invisible and, they would later discover, create invisible force fields of tremendous power. Johnny could burst into flame without being consumed, flying through the air like a human comet. But Ben's transformation was the most difficult to accept. Where his friends had gained abilities that enhanced their human nature, Ben seemed to have lost his humanity entirely, becoming a creature of living rock whose very appearance frightened children and made normal human interaction nearly impossible. The psychological trauma of this change would drive much of the team's early adventures and define Ben's character for decades to come. In the days following their return to Earth, the four transformed individuals faced a choice that would determine not just their own futures, but the very nature of heroism in the Marvel Universe. They could have chosen to hide their abilities, to use Reed's scientific genius to find a way to reverse their transformations and return to normal life. Instead, they chose to use their powers to help others, to become something new and necessary in a world that was becoming increasingly strange and dangerous. Reed Richards felt the weight of responsibility more heavily than anyone. His scientific ambitions had transformed 4 people forever, and he knew that he had an obligation to make their sacrifice meaningful. He threw himself into the study of their new abilities, trying to understand the cosmic forces that had changed them and how those changes could be used for the betterment of humanity. Sue Storm embraced her new role with the quiet strength that would become her trademark. She understood, perhaps better than the others, that they had been given a gift as well as a burden. Her invisible powers made her uniquely suited for reconnaissance and protection, and she began to see how they could use their abilities to help people in ways that normal humans simply couldn't. Johnny Storm was thrilled by his transformation, viewing his flame powers as the ultimate expression of his youthful energy and desire for excitement. He was the first to suggest that they should become public heroes, using their abilities openly to fight crime and protect the innocent. His enthusiasm helped carry the others through their initial doubts and fears. Ben Grimm struggled the most with the decision to become a hero. His transformation had cost him his normal human appearance, and he feared his chance for a normal human life. But Ben's fundamental decency wouldn't allow him to waste his incredible strength on self-pity. If he was going to be stuck looking like a monster, he reasoned, he might as well be a monster who protected people from other monsters. The decision to call themselves the Fantastic Four wasn't made in a moment of inspiration, but grew organically from their first public appearances. Johnny came up with the name during one of their early adventures, and it stuck because it captured something essential about who they were, not just 4 individuals with amazing powers, but a family unit that was greater than the sum of its parts. Their first headquarters was a simple rented office building, but Reed's scientific mind was already designing something more appropriate for their unique needs. The Baxter Building would become their home, their laboratory, and their symbol pit, a towering monument to human ingenuity and family loyalty that would serve as their base of operations for decades to come. The early years of the Fantastic Four, spanning from 1961 to 1970, represent one of the most creative and influential periods in comic book history. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, working together with an almost telepathic understanding of story and character, created not just a superhero team, but an entire universe of wonders that would inspire generations of creators and readers. This was the era when the Marvel Universe truly came alive, when every issue seemed to introduce new concepts, new characters, and new possibilities that expanded the boundaries of what superhero comics could be. Lee's dialogue crackled with energy and wit, while Kirby's art practically burst off the page with cosmic scope and kinetic power. Together, they created a sense of wonder and excitement that made readers feel like they were discovering new worlds with every turn of the page. The Fantastic Four comics of this period had a unique flavor that set them apart from other superhero books. While Superman and Batman operated in worlds that were essentially our own, with a few fantastic elements added, the Fantastic Four lived in a universe where the impossible was commonplace, where scientific discovery and cosmic adventure were part of daily life. It was a world where Reed Richards could casually mention his latest dimensional theories while fighting off an invasion from the negative zone. The team dynamics established during this period would remain the foundation of the Fantastic Four for decades to come. Reed was the brilliant but obsessive scientist, always pushing the boundaries of human knowledge, sometimes at the expense of human relationships. Sue was the heart and conscience of the team, the one who kept them grounded in human concerns even as they dealt with cosmic threats. Johnny was the team's source of energy and humor, his youthful enthusiasm balancing out Reed's serious nature and Ben's occasional grumpiness. But perhaps most importantly, Ben Grimm became the soul of the Fantastic Four, his working-class Brooklyn accent and street-smart attitude providing a human perspective on their increasingly strange adventures. The supporting cast that grew up around the Fantastic Four during this period was equally important to the series' success. Alicia Masters, the blind sculptor who could see Ben's true nature despite his rocky exterior, provided emotional depth and romantic interest. Willie Lumpkin, their friendly postal worker, represented the normal world they were sworn to protect. And Agatha Harkness, Franklin's mysterious nanny, hinted at magical forces that existed alongside scientific wonders. One of the greatest achievements of the Lee Kirby era was the creation of a rogues gallery that perfectly complemented the Fantastic Four's unique mixture of science fiction and family drama. These weren't just powerful opponents for the heroes to fight, but characters whose conflicts with the FF revealed deeper truths about power, responsibility, and the price of ambition. Dr. Victor Von Doom dominated this era, as he would dominate the Fantastic Four's history for decades to come. Doom was Reed Richards' dark reflection, a brilliant scientist whose arrogance and lust for power had led him down a very different path. Where Reed used his intelligence to help others, Doom used his to dominate and control. Where Reed accepted responsibility for his mistakes, Doom blamed others for his failures. The relationship between Reed and Doom was established as deeply personal from their first encounter. They had been college classmates, two brilliant minds who might have changed the world together if Doom's pride hadn't gotten in the way. Doom's facial scarring, hidden behind his iconic metal mask, served as a physical reminder of the price of scientific hubris, a lesson Reed had learned through transforming his friends, while Doom had learned it through disfiguring himself. The puppet master represented a different kind of threat, one that struck at the very heart of what made the Fantastic Four special. His ability to control minds threatened to tear apart the family bonds that held the team together, forcing them to question whether their loyalty to each other was real or artificially induced. The personal stakes were raised even higher by his relationship to Alicia Masters, creating conflicts between love and duty that would resonate throughout the series. Namor the Submariner brought a different dynamic to the series, representing the tension between attraction and conflict that would become a recurring theme in Fantastic Four stories. His romantic interest in Sue Storm created the first real strain in Reed and Sue's relationship, while his role as ruler of Atlantis raised questions about the rights of surface dwellers versus the rights of other civilizations. The Mole Man, the Fantastic Four's very first opponent, established the template for many of their future adversaries, brilliant but twisted individuals whose isolation from normal human society had driven them to extremes. His underground kingdom of Subterranea provided a perfect contrast to the Fantastic Four's public heroism, a hidden world where different rules applied and surface morality held no sway. As Lee and Kirby's confidence in their creation grew, so did the scope and scale of the Fantastic Four's adventures. What began as relatively earthbound stories about a family of superheroes gradually expanded to encompass entire galaxies and alternate dimensions, introducing concepts that would become fundamental to the Marvel Universe. The introduction of the Inhumans represented a quantum leap in the series' mythology. Here was an entire hidden civilization of genetically enhanced humans, each possessing unique abilities granted by exposure to the mysterious Terrigen Mist. The Inhumans weren't just another group of superpowered beings. They were a functioning society with their own culture, their own politics, and their own relationship to humanity. Black Bolt, the Inhumans' silent king, whose voice could shatter mountains, became one of the most compelling characters in the Marvel Universe, despite Meats, or perhaps because of Meats, his inability to speak. His relationship with Medusa, whose living hair gave her incredible powers, provided a template for how love could exist between beings of incredible power. Crystal's romance with Johnny Storm added another layer to the Fantastic Four's ever-expanding family tree. The city of Attilan, hidden in the Himalayan mountains, served as a perfect counterpoint to New York City, where the Fantastic Four's human city was chaotic and unpredictable. Attilan was ordered and controlled, its citizens' destinies determined by their exposure to Terrigen Mist during adolescence. The contrast raised questions about freedom versus security, chaos versus order, that would echo throughout Marvel Comics for decades. The introduction of the Silver Surfer and Galactus marked the true beginning of the Fantastic Four's cosmic phase. Here were beings of such power and scope that they made previous threats seem almost quaint by comparison. Galactus wasn't evil in any conventional sense. He was a force of nature, a cosmic entity whose need to consume planets was as natural and inevitable as a storm or earthquake. The Silver Surfer provided a more human perspective on cosmic power, a being who had sacrificed his own world to save it from Galactus, only to find himself enslaved to the world devourer's hunger. His relationship with Galactus paralleled Reed Richards' relationship with his scientific ambitions. Both involved brilliant individuals who had made Faustian bargains that cost them more than they had expected to pay. Most fans and critics agree that the period from 1965 to 1967 represents the absolute peak of Lee and Kirby's collaboration on the Fantastic Four. During these 3 years, they created some of the most memorable and influential stories in comic book history, tales that perfectly balanced cosmic scope with intimate character development. The Galactus trilogy remains one of the greatest superhero stories ever told, a perfect synthesis of action, character development, and philosophical depth. The story worked on multiple levels as a thrilling adventure about Earth's mightiest heroes facing their greatest challenge, as a meditation on the nature of power and responsibility, and as an exploration of what it means to be human in a vast and seemingly indifferent universe. The introduction of the ultimate nullifier during this storyline established Reed Richards as more than just a brilliant scientist. He was a man capable of making the hardest choices when the fate of the world hung in the balance. His willingness to threaten universal destruction to save Earth showed the depth of his commitment to his adopted home, while his refusal to actually use the weapon demonstrated his fundamental humanity. The This Man, This Monster storyline, often cited as the greatest Fantastic Four story ever told, perfectly captured the series' unique blend of science fiction adventure and human drama. The story of a bitter man who steals Ben Grimm's appearance and identity, only to discover the true meaning of heroism. It explored themes of redemption, sacrifice, and the difference between looking like a hero and actually being one. The Black Panther's introduction brought a new level of political sophistication to the series, as Lee and Kirby created Marvel's first major black superhero during the height of the civil rights movement. T'Challa's debut in the Fantastic Four comics established him as a brilliant scientist and warrior king, whose African nation of Wakanda was more technologically advanced than any Western country. The relationship between T'Challa and the Fantastic Four was built on mutual respect rather than the suspicion or conflict that often characterized the team's encounters with other powered individuals. The Panther recognized the FF's genuine desire to help others, while they respected his intelligence and his commitment to protecting his people. This relationship would prove to be one of the most enduring friendships in the Marvel Universe. Throughout all of these cosmic adventures and earth-shaking battles, Lee and Kirby never lost sight of what made the Fantastic Four special. They were a family first and superheroes second. The team's greatest strength wasn't Reed's intelligence or Ben's power or Sue's force fields or Johnny's flames. It was their love for each other and their commitment to staying together no matter what challenges they faced. This family dynamic played out in countless small moments throughout their adventures. Reed's absent-minded professor routine drove Sue crazy, but she knew it came from his genuine desire to help people through scientific discovery. Ben's gruff exterior and constant complaints about clobbering time masked his deep affection for his teammates and his absolute loyalty to their cause. Johnny's practical jokes and hot-headed behavior often got the team into trouble, but his enthusiasm and courage made him the heart of their public image. He was the one who interacted most easily with their fans, the one who seemed to genuinely enjoy being a superhero rather than viewing it as a burden or responsibility. Sue's evolution during this period was gradual but significant. Initially portrayed as the team's weakest member, more likely to faint at crucial moments than to contribute meaningfully to their victories, she slowly grew into a more active and assertive role. Her force field powers, initially just a defensive ability, were developed into one of the most versatile and powerful abilities in the Marvel Universe. The introduction of Franklin Richards, Reed and Sue's son, added another dimension to the family dynamic. Here was a child born with incredible cosmic powers, a living reminder of how the cosmic rays that had transformed his parents continued to influence their lives in unexpected ways. Gypsy, Franklin's presence raised questions about the nature of power and responsibility that would echo throughout the series for decades to come. The Baxter Building itself became a character during this period, Reed's constantly evolving laboratory and the team's home base. The building's upper floors housed Reed's incredible inventions and experiments, while the lower floors provided living space for a family that needed both privacy and security. The Fantasticar, Reed's flying automobile, gave them the mobility they needed to respond quickly to threats anywhere in the world. The creative partnership between Stan Lee and Jack Kirby began to show signs of strain as the 1960s drew to a close. Kirby, who had been the primary visual architect of the Marvel Universe, was growing frustrated with his role in the creative process and his share of the credit and profits from the characters he had helped create. The final issues of their collaboration, while still excellent by any objective standard, lacked some of the manic energy and joy that had characterized their earlier work together. There were fewer groundbreaking new concepts, fewer moments of pure comic book magic that had defined their peak period. The sense of discovery that had made their early issues so exciting was gradually replaced by a more professional but less inspired approach. Issue 67, which introduced Adam Warlock, originally known as Him, marked the effective end of Lee and Kirby's greatest creative period on the Fantastic Four. While they would continue to work together for a few more issues, the magic that had produced some of the greatest superhero comics ever created was already beginning to fade. The legacy of this era cannot be overstated. Lee and Kirby had created not just a superhero team but an entire universe of possibilities that would inspire creators for generations to come. They had established character archetypes and story structures that would influence superhero comics for decades, proving that the medium was capable of supporting stories with genuine depth, complexity, and emotional resonance. Most importantly, they had created a family that readers could believe in and care about, four individuals whose love for each other made their cosmic adventures feel grounded in genuine human emotion. The Fantastic Four of the Lee Kirby era weren't just superheroes saving the world, but people we wanted to spend time with, whose victories felt like our victories and whose struggles touched our hearts. When Jack Kirby left the Fantastic Four after issue 102 in 1970, it marked the end of an era that many fans consider the absolute pinnacle of superhero comics. Kirby had been more than just the artist on the series' Braze. He had been its visual architect, its cosmic imagination made manifest on the page. His departure left a creative vacuum that would prove difficult for subsequent creative teams to fill. The Marvel of the early 1970s was a very different company from the scrappy upstart that had launched the Fantastic Four a decade earlier. Success had brought resources and opportunities, but also corporate pressures and creative constraints that hadn't existed in the freewheeling early days. The Fantastic Four was no longer just a comic book, it was a valuable intellectual property that needed to be managed and protected. Stan Lee, while still serving as the book's writer, was increasingly pulled away from day-to-day comic book creation by his expanding role as Marvel's public face and corporate liaison. His dialogue remained sharp and his plotting remained solid, but there was a sense that his heart was no longer fully invested in the monthly adventures of Marvel's first family. The artists who followed Kirby faced an almost impossible task. How do you follow a legend? How do you maintain the visual excitement and cosmic scope that had made the Fantastic Four special while still bringing your own sensibilities to the book? John Buscema, who took over the art duties, was a skilled and experienced professional whose work had graced many Marvel titles, but his style was more grounded and realistic than Kirby's cosmic bombast. Buscema's Fantastic Four was elegant and well-crafted, but it lacked the raw energy and innovative page layouts that had made Kirby's version so exciting. Where Kirby's art had exploded off the page with dynamic action and impossible technology, Buscema's work was more controlled and conventional, beautiful in its own way but somehow smaller in scope and ambition. The stories of this transitional period reflected this change in tone and approach. While still featuring cosmic threats and dimensional adventures, there was a sense that the series was beginning to look backward rather than forward, recycling concepts and characters from the glory days rather than pushing into new territory. The sense of discovery and wonder that had characterized the Lee Kirby era was gradually replaced by a more workmanlike approach to superhero storytelling. Roy Thomas, who had been Stan Lee's protege and heir apparent for years, officially took over the writing duties on Fantastic Four with issue 106 in 1971. Thomas brought his own sensibilities to the series, including his love of comic book history and his desire to create stories that honored the Lee Kirby legacy while still moving the characters forward. Thomas's approach to the Fantastic Four was more self-consciously literary than Lee's had been. Where Lee had written by instinct, creating dialogue and situations that felt natural and spontaneous, Thomas was more methodical in his approach, crafting stories that were carefully plotted and thematically consistent. His background as a former English teacher showed in his writing, which was more formally structured but sometimes less emotionally immediate than Lee's work. The Thomas era saw several significant developments in the Fantastic Four mythology. He was the first writer to seriously explore the implications of Franklin Richards' cosmic-level powers, introducing storylines that dealt with the challenges of raising a child who might be more powerful than his parents. These stories raised questions about power and responsibility that went beyond the usual superhero fare, dealing with issues of child development and family dynamics in ways that were both sophisticated and emotionally genuine. Thomas also began to explore the darker implications of Reed Richards' scientific obsessions. While Lee had generally portrayed Reed's work as beneficial to humanity, Thomas was more willing to show the potential negative consequences of unbridled scientific ambition. Reed's experiments sometimes went wrong in ways that endangered his family, and Thomas wasn't afraid to show Sue's growing frustration with her husband's tendency to put science before family responsibilities. The introduction of new villains during this period reflected Thomas's more psychologically complex approach to storytelling. Characters like the Mad Thinker and his awesome android were more than just physical threats. They represented different aspects of intellectual pride and the dangers of pure logic divorced from human emotion. These antagonists served as dark mirrors for Reed Richards, showing what he might become if he lost his connection to human values. Thomas's tenure also saw increased attention paid to Sue Storm's character development. He was one of the first writers to seriously question why the most powerful member of the team was often relegated to supportive roles, and he began to give Sue more active and central roles in the team's adventures. While his approach was sometimes awkward by modern standards, Thomas deserves credit for recognizing that Sue's potential had been underutilized in earlier stories. Gerry Conway took over the Fantastic Four writing duties in 1974, bringing with him a reputation as one of Marvel's most reliable and prolific writers. Conway had already made his mark on Amazing Spider-Man and other Marvel titles, proving his ability to handle both action and character development. However, his run on Fantastic Four would prove to be one of the most controversial and divisive periods in the series' history. Conway's approach to the Fantastic Four was more soap opera-oriented than his predecessors, with an emphasis on relationship drama and interpersonal conflict that sometimes overshadowed the cosmic adventure elements that had defined the series. He seemed particularly interested in exploring the tensions and contradictions within the team's family dynamic, often pushing these conflicts to their breaking point. The most controversial aspect of Conway's run was his treatment of Sue Storm. Rather than building on Roy Thomas's efforts to give her a more active role, Conway seemed determined to sideline her character, often removing her from the team's adventures through various plot devices. Sue spent long stretches of Conway's run either powerless, absent, or relegated to purely supportive roles that wasted her considerable abilities. This approach reached its nadir in stories where Sue would lose her powers or be kidnapped just as the team faced their greatest challenges, forcing the male members to rescue her rather than allowing her to contribute to their victories. Conway's justification for these choices was that he wanted to explore Sue's identity beyond her role as a superhero, but the result was often to make her seem weak and dependent rather than complex and multifaceted. The family dynamics during Conway's run were marked by an unusual amount of discord and mistrust. Reed and Sue's marriage went through several rough patches, with Sue questioning whether Reed truly loved her or simply saw her as another one of his experiments. Johnny and Ben's friendship was strained by various misunderstandings and conflicts, often over romantic interests or questions of loyalty. Conway did introduce some memorable villains and concepts during his tenure, including the mysterious Impossible Man and various alternate dimension versions of the team members. However, these new additions often felt more like plot devices than fully realized characters, lacking the depth and resonance of the classic Lee Kirby creations. The art during Conway's run was handled by various talented individuals, including John Buscema, Rich Buckler, and George Perez, but the constantly changing artistic teams gave the book an inconsistent visual identity that made it harder for readers to develop a strong attachment to the series. Each new artist brought their own interpretation of the characters, but without a consistent visual voice, the book began to feel like a corporate product rather than a unified creative vision. The mid to late 1970s represented a period of uncertainty for the Fantastic Four as Marvel struggled to find a creative direction that could recapture the magic of the Lee Kirby era while still moving the characters forward into new territory. Various writers and artists cycled through the book, each bringing their own approach and sensibilities, but none managing to establish a lasting vision for the series. This period saw several attempts to reinvent or refresh the Fantastic Four concept, some more successful than others. There were storylines that temporarily replaced team members with new characters, adventures that took the team to alternate dimensions where different versions of themselves existed, and cosmic epics that tried to recapture the scope and grandeur of the Galactus trilogy. Suriti's sesting dimensions when refresh the Fantastic Four concept, some more successful than others. One of the more successful experiments during this period was the introduction of time travel elements that allowed the creative teams to explore different periods in the team's history. These stories provided opportunities to revisit classic villains and situations while also revealing new information about the characters' backgrounds and motivations. The time travel stories also allowed for some clever plotting that connected seemingly unrelated adventures from different eras. The late 70s also saw increased attention paid to the cosmic aspects of the Marvel Universe, with the Fantastic Four often serving as Earth's representatives in intergalactic conflicts and cosmic events. While these stories were often visually spectacular and conceptually ambitious, they sometimes lost sight of the human elements that had made the Lee Kirby era so compelling. The search for a new creative identity was complicated by the changing nature of the comic book industry itself. The distribution system was evolving, reader tastes were becoming more sophisticated, and competition from other publishers was increasing. The Fantastic Four, which had once been Marvel's flagship title, now had to compete for attention with newer, flashier books that seemed more in tune with contemporary sensibilities. Despite these challenges, the Fantastic Four of the 70s wasn't without its moments of brilliance. There were individual issues and storylines that captured something of the original series' magic, demonstrating that the concept was still viable and that the characters still had stories worth telling. The problem was consistency, as the series never quite found a unified vision that could sustain reader interest over the long term. As the 1970s drew to a close, the Fantastic Four stood at a crossroads. The series had survived the departure of its original creative team and had weathered various attempts at reinvention, but it hadn't yet found a new creative voice that could match the impact and influence of the Lee Kirby era. The book was still being published, still had its loyal fans, but it was no longer the cornerstone of the Marvel universe that it had once been. The challenges facing the series were both creative and commercial. Creatively, the book needed to find a way to honor its classic elements while still feeling fresh and relevant to contemporary readers. The cosmic adventure and family dynamics that had defined the series were still viable concepts, but they needed to be executed with the same energy and innovation that had made the original run so special. Commercially, the Fantastic Four needed to prove that it could still attract and hold readers in an increasingly competitive marketplace. The direct market was beginning to emerge, changing the way comics were sold and consumed, and readers were becoming more discriminating in their choices. The Fantastic Four couldn't rely on nostalgia alone. It needed to offer something genuinely compelling to justify its existence. The stage was being set for what would become one of the most celebrated runs in Fantastic Four history, as a young artist named John Byrne was beginning to make his mark at Marvel Comics. Byrne had already shown his ability to revitalize classic concepts through his work on other titles, and he would soon bring his unique vision to Marvel's first family. The wilderness years of the 1970s, while often frustrating for fans and creators alike, served an important purpose in the Fantastic Four's evolution. They demonstrated which elements of the original concept were truly essential and which could be modified or discarded. They also provided valuable lessons about what didn't work, clearing the way for future creative teams to build something new and exciting from the series' solid foundations. As the decade ended, the Fantastic Four remained one of Marvel's most important and recognizable properties, even if its creative heights hadn't been reached in recent years. The characters were still beloved by fans around the world, their iconic images still instantly recognizable, and their potential for great storytelling remained intact. All they needed was the right creative team to unlock that potential once again. In 1981, Marvel Comics made a decision that would revitalize the Fantastic Four and restore the series to its position as one of the company's flagship titles. They handed creative control of the book to John Byrne, a Canadian artist-writer who had already proven his ability to revitalize classic concepts through his acclaimed work on X-Men and other Marvel properties. Byrne's appointment as both writer and artist on Fantastic Four marked the beginning of what many consider to be the series' second golden age. Byrne brought a unique combination of skills to the Fantastic Four that made him perfectly suited for the challenge of following in the footsteps of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. As an artist, he possessed a clean, dynamic style that could handle both intimate character moments and cosmic action sequences with equal skill. His layouts were innovative without being flashy. His character designs were both modern and timeless, and his storytelling ability was among the best in the business. As a writer, Byrne had a deep understanding of what had made the original Fantastic Four so special, combined with a modern sensibility that allowed him to update the concept for contemporary readers. He understood that the series' greatest strength lay in the family relationship between the four main characters, and he was determined to make that relationship the emotional center of his stories. Byrne's approach to the Fantastic Four was respectful of the Lee Kirby legacy, while still being willing to make significant changes and additions to the mythology. He wasn't interested in simply imitating what had come before S.H.I.E.L.D. He wanted to build on that foundation and create something that would stand as a worthy successor to the original run. The visual design of Byrne's Fantastic Four was immediately distinctive. His Reed Richards was more athletic and heroic-looking than previous versions, while maintaining the character's intellectual intensity. His Sue Storm was both beautiful and powerful, a woman who clearly possessed both inner strength and formidable abilities. Johnny Storm retained his youthful energy but seemed more mature and responsible than in previous interpretations. Perhaps most importantly, Byrne's Ben Grimm was a perfect balance of power and pathos. The Thing remained visually impressive and physically intimidating, but Byrne never let readers forget the human being trapped inside that rocky exterior. His facial expressions and body language conveyed a wide range of emotions, making Ben one of the most sympathetic and relatable characters in comics. One of Byrne's most significant and lasting contributions to the Fantastic Four mythology was his transformation of Sue Storm from the Invisible Girl to the Invisible Woman. This change was more than just cosmetics, it represented a fundamental shift in how the character was portrayed and the role she played within the team dynamic. Byrne recognized that Sue's powers were potentially among the most formidable in the Marvel Universe, but that previous creators had often underutilized her abilities in favor of more traditional feminine roles. His Sue Storm was a fully realized superhero in her own right, capable of holding her own against any opponent and making crucial contributions to the team's victories. The force field abilities that Byrne developed for Sue were revolutionary in their scope and application. Rather than simple protective barriers, Sue's force fields became versatile tools that could be used for offense as well as defense. She could create invisible platforms for flying, invisible restraints for capturing enemies, and even invisible weapons for combat situations. More importantly, Byrne showed Sue using her intelligence and strategic thinking to find creative solutions to problems that brute force couldn't solve. She became the team's tactical expert, the one who could see patterns and possibilities that others missed. Her invisibility made her perfect for reconnaissance and infiltration missions, while her force fields made her the team's ultimate protector. The evolution of Sue's character wasn't just about her powers, it was about her role as the emotional leader of the team. Byrne's Sue was the one who held the family together during difficult times, who could see past the surface conflicts to the underlying love and loyalty that bound the four heroes together. She was both Reed's intellectual equal and his emotional anchor, a woman who could challenge his decisions when necessary while still supporting his goals and ambitions. Byrne also explored Sue's relationship with her brother Johnny in new and interesting ways. Rather than the simple protective older sister dynamic that had characterized their early interactions, Byrne showed Sue and Johnny as equals who respected each other's abilities and judgment. Their sibling relationship remained an important part of the team's dynamic, but it was more mature and nuanced than it had been in previous interpretations. The visual representation of Sue's new status was equally important. Byrne designed a new costume for her that was both practical and elegant, emphasizing her role as a professional superhero rather than a reluctant participant in her teammates' adventures. The costume changes reflected her growing confidence and assertiveness, showing readers that this was a woman who had fully embraced her role as one of the world's premier superheroes. One of the most ambitious and emotionally powerful storylines of Byrne's run was The Trial of Reed Richards, a multi-part epic that examined the moral and ethical implications of Reed's role in creating Galactus's Herald, the Silver Surfer. This storyline demonstrated Byrne's ability to take classic Fantastic Four concepts and explore them from new and challenging angles. The basic premise of the trial was that Reed Richards was being held accountable by cosmic entities for his role in freeing Galactus from the threat of the Ultimate Nullifier years earlier. By saving Galactus's life, Reed had enabled the World Devourer to continue consuming planets and destroying civilizations across the galaxy. The trial forced Reed to confront the unintended consequences of his actions and to defend his moral choices before a cosmic jury. Byrne used this storyline to explore some of the deepest themes in the Fantastic Four mythology. What was the proper response to an enemy who was evil not through choice but through nature? Did Reed have the right to make decisions that affected the entire universe? How could anyone balance immediate threats against long-term consequences when the stakes were so impossibly high? The trial also served as a vehicle for examining Reed's character in unprecedented depth. Byrne showed Reed as a man who was willing to accept responsibility for his actions, even when those actions had been motivated by the best of intentions. Reed's defense wasn't based on claims of innocence, but on arguments about the complexity of moral decision-making in impossible situations. The cosmic scope of the trial allowed Byrne to showcase his artistic abilities, while also demonstrating his understanding of the Fantastic Four's place in the larger Marvel universe. The courtroom sequences were visually spectacular, featuring alien judges and cosmic prosecutors. but they never overshadowed the human drama at the heart of the story. Perhaps most importantly, the trial storyline reinforced the family bonds that held the Fantastic Four together. Sue, Johnny, and Ben stood by Reed throughout his ordeal, not because they agreed with all of his decisions, but because they understood that his mistakes were the inevitable result of trying to do the right thing in an impossibly complex universe. The resolution of the trial was both satisfying and thought-provoking. Reed was ultimately acquitted, but not because his actions were deemed perfect. Instead, the cosmic jury recognized that moral perfection was impossible in a universe filled with impossible choices, and that Reed's willingness to accept responsibility for his mistakes was itself a form of moral courage. Byrne's run on Fantastic Four was notable not just for its treatment of the main characters, but also for its expansion and development of the supporting cast. Byrne understood that a truly great superhero series needed a rich supporting environment filled with characters who could provide both conflict and cooperation for the heroes. Alicia Masters, Ben Grimm's longtime love interest, received particular attention during Byrne's run. Rather than simply serving as a romantic subplot, Alicia became a fully realized character with her own goals, abilities, and personality. Her work as a sculptor wasn't just a hobby, it was a calling that allowed her to see beauty and truth in ways that others couldn't. Byrne's treatment of Alicia's blindness was particularly sensitive and well handled. He never portrayed her disability as a limitation or a source of pity, but rather as a different way of experiencing the world that sometimes gave her insights that sighted people missed. Her relationship with Ben was based on genuine affection and mutual respect, not on sympathy or obligation. The introduction of new supporting characters during Byrne's run helped to expand the Fantastic Four's world while maintaining its focus on family and relationships. Characters like Frankie Ray, who would later become Nova, Herald of Galactus, provided new perspectives on familiar themes while also creating new story possibilities. Byrne also made excellent use of classic Fantastic Four supporting characters, updating and modernizing them for contemporary readers while maintaining their essential characteristics. Willie Lumpkin remained the team's friendly mailman, but Byrne gave him more personality and involvement in their adventures. Agatha Harkness continued to serve as Franklin's nanny and magical advisor, but her role was expanded to include more active participation in the team's cosmic adventures. The villains during Byrne's run were similarly well developed, with classic foes like Doctor Doom receiving new depth and complexity while new threats were introduced that challenged the team in different ways. Byrne's Doctor Doom was particularly impressive, maintaining all of the characters' classic arrogance and brilliance while adding new layers of motivation and psychology. One of the most significant developments during Byrne's run was his treatment of Franklin Richards, Reed and Sue's son, whose incredible psychic powers made him one of the most potentially powerful beings in the Marvel Universe. Byrne recognized that Franklin's existence raised profound questions about power, responsibility, and the nature of childhood that went far beyond typical superhero concerns. Byrne's approach to Franklin was to treat him as a real child first and a cosmic entity second. Franklin wasn't just a plot device or a source of unlimited power, he was a little boy trying to understand his place in a very complicated world. His interactions with his parents and uncles Johnny and Ben were genuine family moments that grounded even the most cosmic storylines in human emotion. The challenges of raising a child with Franklin's abilities provided rich material for exploring the Fantastic Four's family dynamics. Reed's scientific curiosity about his son's powers sometimes conflicted with his paternal instincts, while Sue's protective maternal feelings had to be balanced against the need to help Franklin learn to control his abilities. Byrne was careful not to use Franklin as an easy solution to the team's problems. While the boy's powers were incredible, they were also unpredictable and potentially dangerous. Franklin's abilities had to be carefully managed and controlled, not just for the safety of others, but for his own psychological well-being. The introduction of Agatha Harkness as Franklin's nanny and magical tutor provided an elegant solution to some of the practical problems of Franklin's existence. Agatha's centuries of experience with magical and psychic phenomena made her uniquely qualified to help Franklin develop his abilities safely, while her maternal instincts ensured that he would be treated as a child rather than just a powerful weapon. Franklin's presence also allowed Byrne to explore themes of legacy and continuity that were central to the Fantastic Four concept. Here was the next generation of the Richards family, carrying forward both the scientific curiosity of his father and the compassionate strength of his mother. Franklin represented hope for the future, proof that the Fantastic Four's legacy would continue beyond their own lifetimes. Byrne's background in science fiction served him well in creating the technological and scientific elements that were so crucial to the Fantastic Four's appeal. Horim Expars. S.H.I.E.L.D. Speardeen and Sim Expars. His understanding of both real science and comic book pseudoscience allowed him to create inventions and concepts that felt both plausible and fantastic. Reed Richards' laboratory during Byrne's run was a wonderland of impossible devices and ongoing experiments. Byrne took great care in designing the Baxter Building's upper floors, creating a space that felt both functional and fantastic. Every piece of equipment had a purpose, every experiment had a goal, and the overall effect was of a working scientific facility rather than just a collection of impressive-looking gadgets. The Fantasticar, the team's primary mode of transportation, received particular attention from Byrne. Rather than just being a flying car, it became a sophisticated piece of technology that could adapt to different mission requirements. Byrne showed different configurations for different situations, from high-speed pursuit to deep space exploration, and he made sure that the vehicle's capabilities were clearly established and consistently applied. Byrne's treatment of the team's costumes was similarly thoughtful. Rather than just being colorful uniforms, the Fantastic Four's costumes were portrayed as sophisticated pieces of technology that provided protection, communication, and life support in hostile environments. The unstable molecules that made up the costumes weren't just a convenient explanation for why they didn't burn up when Johnny flamed on Mineplane. They were a genuine scientific achievement that had practical applications beyond superhero activities. The dimensional travel and time travel elements that were so important to Fantastic Four adventures were handled with particular care during Byrne's run. He established clear rules for how these phenomena worked, and he was careful to maintain consistency in their application. This attention to detail made the team's cosmic adventures feel more grounded and believable, even when they were dealing with concepts that stretched the boundaries of scientific possibility. Byrne's run on Fantastic Four came to an end in 1986 with issue 293, marking the conclusion of what many fans consider to be the series' second golden age. His departure was due to creative differences with Marvel editorial, but his impact on the series would be felt for decades to come. The legacy of Byrne's run was multifaceted and lasting. He had successfully modernized the Fantastic Four concept for contemporary readers while maintaining all of the elements that had made the original series so special. His treatment of Sue Storm as the Invisible Woman established her as one of the most powerful and respected female superheroes in comics, while his development of the supporting cast had created a rich and believable world around the main characters. Perhaps most importantly, Byrne had proven that the Fantastic Four concept was still viable and relevant, that there were still great stories to be told about Marvel's first family. His run had attracted both critical acclaim and commercial success, demonstrating that readers were still hungry for well-crafted superhero adventures that combined cosmic scope with human emotion. The artistic legacy of Byrne's run was equally significant. His clean, dynamic style had influenced a generation of comic book artists, while his innovative page layouts and storytelling techniques had pushed the medium forward in subtle but important ways. His ability to handle both intimate character moments and spectacular action sequences had set a new standard for superhero comics. As Byrne moved on to other projects, he left behind a Fantastic Four series that was creatively revitalized and commercially successful. The foundation he had built would support the series through various creative transitions in the years to come. and many of the concepts and character developments he had introduced would become permanent parts of the Fantastic Four mythology. The Renaissance that Byrne had created was more than just a successful run by a talented creator. It was proof that classic superhero concepts could be renewed and refreshed for new generations of readers without losing their essential appeal. The Fantastic Four had once again proven that they were indeed the world's greatest comic magazine. Following John Byrne's departure from Fantastic Four in 1986, Marvel faced the difficult task of finding creators who could maintain the creative momentum and quality that had been established during the Renaissance period. The success of Byrne's run had raised expectations among both fans and industry professionals, creating pressure to continue delivering stories that met those elevated standards. The late 1980s comic book industry was undergoing significant changes that would affect how superhero comics were created, marketed, and consumed. The rise of comic book specialty stores was changing the distribution model, while the emergence of independent publishers was creating new competition for readers' attention and dollars. Marvel was also dealing with internal changes as the company grew larger and more corporate, sometimes at the expense of creative freedom and individual vision. Steve Englehart and John Buscema took over the series immediately following Byrne's departure, bringing their own considerable talents to the task of continuing the Fantastic Four's adventures. Englehart was an experienced writer with a strong background in cosmic storytelling, while Buscema was a veteran artist whose work had graced Marvel's pages for decades. On paper, they seemed like an ideal team to handle Marvel's first family. However, the transition proved more difficult than anticipated. Englehart's writing style, while sophisticated and well-crafted, was quite different from Byrne's approach. Where Byrne had focused on intimate family dynamics and character development, Englehart was more interested in large-scale cosmic adventures and complex plotting. This shift in focus, while not necessarily inferior, created a different tone and feel for the series that some readers found jarring. Buscema's art, while technically excellent, also represented a significant stylistic change from Byrne's clean, modern approach. Buscema's style was more classical and detailed, with an emphasis on realistic anatomy and careful composition. His work was beautiful and professional, but it sometimes felt more static and formal than the dynamic energy that had characterized Byrne's pages. The most significant challenge facing the post-Byrne creative teams was the simple fact that they were following an act that many considered impossible to follow. Byrne's run had been so successful and so well received that any subsequent work would inevitably be compared to it, often unfavorably. This created a psychological burden that made it difficult for new creators to establish their own vision for the series. As the 1990s began, the comic book industry was entering a period of unprecedented change and upheaval. The rise of Image Comics and the increasing popularity of darker, more violent superhero stories were forcing established publishers to reconsider their approach to classic characters. Marvel, like other companies, began experimenting with more extreme storylines and visual styles in an effort to remain relevant in a changing marketplace. The Fantastic Four, despite their status as Marvel's first family, were not immune to these industry trends. Various creative teams attempted to update the series for 90s sensibilities, often by adding elements that seemed designed more to shock than to enhance the storytelling. These efforts often resulted in stories that felt forced and artificial, as if the creators were trying to impose external expectations onto characters whose essential nature was incompatible with extreme approaches. One of the most visible changes during this period was the alteration of the team's classic costumes. The simple, iconic designs that had served the characters for decades were replaced with more complex, detailed uniforms that reflected contemporary fashion trends in superhero comics. While these new designs were often technically impressive, they sometimes seemed to miss the point of what made the original costumes so effective and memorable. The storytelling during this period also began to emphasize action and spectacle over character development and family dynamics. While the Fantastic Four had always featured impressive battles and cosmic adventures, The best stories had always grounded these elements in genuine human emotion and relationship dynamics. The 90s approach often seemed to reverse these priorities, with character development taking a back seat to impressive visual displays. Tom DeFalco, who took over writing duties during this period, was a veteran Marvel creator with a deep understanding of the company's characters and history. However, even his considerable skills couldn't entirely overcome the challenges of trying to modernize classic characters for an increasingly demanding and fragmented audience. His stories were competent and sometimes inspired, but they often felt like they were fighting against the essential nature of the Fantastic Four concept. The art during this period was handled by various talented individuals, including Paul Ryan and others, but the constantly changing creative teams made it difficult to establish a consistent visual identity for the series. Each new artist brought their own interpretation of the characters and their world, but without a unifying vision, the book began to feel more like a collection of individual issues than a coherent ongoing narrative. One of the most controversial storylines of this period was the Malice Saga, which saw Sue Storm possessed by a malevolent entity that turned her against her own family. While the story had some interesting psychological implications and provided opportunities for dramatic character interactions, it also exemplified some of the problems that were beginning to plague the series. The Malice storyline took Sue Storm, who had been developed into one of comics' most powerful and respected female superheroes during the Byrne era, and reduced her to a victim of external manipulation. Rather than dealing with genuine character conflicts or growth, the story used supernatural possession as a shortcut to creating drama and tension within the team. The visual representation of Malice, with her dominatrix-inspired costume and aggressive sexuality, seemed designed more to titillate than to serve any meaningful story purpose. This approach felt particularly problematic given Sue's recent evolution from girl to woman, as it seemed to undermine the progress that had been made in developing her as a serious character. The resolution of the Malice storyline, while emotionally satisfying in some ways, also established a troubling pattern that would recur throughout this period: the use of external threats to create artificial drama within the team, rather than exploring the genuine conflicts and challenges that would naturally arise from their unique family situation. The impact of the Malice saga extended beyond Sue's character to affect the entire team dynamic. Reed's inability to help his wife, Johnny's confusion about his sister's transformation, and Ben's feelings of helplessness all provided material for character development, but the supernatural nature of the threat meant that these emotional consequences couldn't be fully explored or resolved through character growth alone. The late 80s and early 90s were also marked by increasing corporate interference in the creative process, as Marvel's business strategies began to have more direct impact on editorial decisions. The success of certain characters or concepts in other media would sometimes lead to mandates to emphasize those elements in the comics, regardless of whether they served the stories being told. The rise of toy lines and licensing deals meant that character designs and story elements were sometimes chosen for their commercial potential rather than their narrative effectiveness. While this wasn't necessarily a bad thing in principle, it sometimes resulted in creative decisions that felt forced or artificial, as if they were being imposed from outside, rather than growing naturally from the characters and their situations. The increasing complexity of Marvel's shared universe was also creating challenges for creators working on team books like Fantastic Four. Crossover events and continuity requirements sometimes force storylines to serve larger corporate needs, rather than the specific requirements of the individual series. This could result in stories that felt disjointed or incomplete, as if they were chapters in someone else's story rather than complete narratives in their own right. The pressure to maintain monthly publication schedules while dealing with these various constraints often resulted in rushed or incomplete stories that didn't receive the time and attention they needed to reach their full potential. Artists and writers were sometimes forced to work on tight deadlines that didn't allow for the careful plotting and character development that had made the series great in the past. As the 1990s progressed, The problems affecting the Fantastic Four series became increasingly difficult to ignore or overcome. Sales figures were declining, critical reception was becoming more mixed, and the series was no longer considered one of Marvel's premier titles. The book that had launched the Marvel Universe was beginning to feel like a relic from an earlier era. Various attempts were made to revitalize the series, including temporary roster changes, alternate universe storylines, and guest appearances by popular characters from other Marvel titles. While some of these efforts showed promise, none managed to recapture the consistent quality and popular appeal that had characterized the series' best periods. The introduction of new characters and concepts during this period was often driven more by marketing considerations than by genuine story needs. New villains were created to provide impressive visual spectacles, new allies were introduced to broaden the series' appeal to different demographics, and new technologies were developed to showcase artistic skills and contemporary storytelling techniques. However, these additions often felt superficial and temporary, lacking the depth and resonance that had made classic Fantastic Four concepts so enduring. Instead of building on the series' existing strengths, many of these innovations seemed to be trying to replace them entirely, which only served to alienate longtime fans without necessarily attracting new readers. The creative teams during this period were generally talented and well-intentioned, but they were working within a system that didn't always reward the qualities that had made the Fantastic Four special. The emphasis on immediate visual impact and spectacular action sequences often came at the expense of the character development and emotional depth that had been the series' greatest strengths. The final straw for the original Fantastic Four series came with the Onslaught crossover event in 1996. This company-wide storyline was designed to revitalize Marvel's core characters by removing them from continuity and giving creators a chance to start fresh with updated origins and modernized concepts. The Onslaught event saw the apparent deaths of the Fantastic Four along with the Avengers and other major Marvel heroes as they sacrificed themselves to stop a powerful psychic entity that threatened to destroy reality itself. While the heroes' deaths were portrayed as noble sacrifices that saved the world, the real motivation for the storyline was commercial rather than creative. Marvel was struggling financially during this period, and the company's leadership believed that radical changes were necessary to attract new readers and revitalize sales. The decision to cancel the Fantastic Four was part of a larger strategy to streamline the company's publishing line and focus resources on properties that seemed more commercially viable. The cancellation of Fantastic Four with issue 414 marked the end of an era that had lasted 35 years. For the first time since 1961, there was no ongoing Fantastic Four comic book being published by Marvel Comics. The series that had launched the Marvel Universe had apparently run its course. However, the cancellation was also presented as an opportunity rather than an ending. Marvel's leadership promised that the characters would return in new and exciting forms, updated for contemporary audiences and freed from the constraints of decades of continuity. The stage was being set for what would become known as the Heroes Reborn experiment. The end of the original Fantastic Four series was mourning by many fans who had grown up with the characters and considered them an essential part of the Marvel Universe. The stage was being set for what would become known as the Heroes Reborn experiment. However, there was also anticipation about what the future might hold, and hope that the upcoming relaunch would recapture some of the magic that had made the series special in the first place. The stage was being set for what would become known as the Heroes Reborn experiment. In 1996, Marvel Comics made one of the most controversial and expensive decisions in the company's history. The stage was being set for what a future might hold, and hoped that the upcoming relaunch would recapture some of the magic that had made the series special in the first place. In 1996, Marvel Comics made one of the most controversial and expensive decisions in the company's history. The stage was being set for what a future match of in the company's history. Facing declining sales and mounting financial pressures, Marvel executives decided to hand over their most important characters, including the Fantastic Four, to Image Comics co-founder Jim Lee for a complete reboot under the Heroes Reborn banner. The deal was reportedly worth over $1 million, making it one of the largest creator contracts in comic book history at that time. Lee, along with his creative partner Rob Liefeld, would have complete creative control over the relaunched titles, with the freedom to redesign the characters and reimagine their origins for a new generation of readers. The decision represented a dramatic shift in Marvel's corporate strategy. Rather than trying to fix the problems that had been plaguing their core titles, they were essentially admitting defeat and starting over from scratch. The Heroes Reborn experiment was a tacit acknowledgement that the original Marvel universe had become too complex, too continuity-heavy, and too dated to attract modern audiences. Jim Lee was uniquely positioned to take on this challenge. As one of the founding members of Image Comics, he had already proven his ability to create commercially successful superhero comics that appealed to contemporary readers. His dynamic art style and modern sensibilities had made him one of the most popular creators in the industry, and his involvement in Heroes Reborn generated significant media attention and fan interest. The Fantastic Four relaunch was particularly significant because it marked the first time in the team's history that they had been completely reimagined from the ground up. Previous creative changes had involved new interpretations of existing characters, but Heroes Reborn promised to reinvent the very concept of Marvel's first family for the modern era. The pressure on Lee and his team was enormous. They were being asked to prove that classic Marvel concepts could be updated and modernized without losing their essential appeal, while also demonstrating that the Heroes Reborn approach could solve the commercial problems that had led to the original series' cancellation. Jim Lee's approach to the Fantastic Four was to preserve the basic concept while updating everything else for contemporary audiences. The four main characters retained their essential personalities and relationships, but their origins, costumes, and world were completely redesigned to reflect 1990s sensibilities and storytelling techniques. Lee's Reed Richards was younger and more physically heroic than previous versions, reflecting the era's preference for action-oriented protagonists. While still brilliant and scientifically minded, this Reed was more likely to solve problems through direct action rather than lengthy exposition and careful planning. His stretching powers were portrayed with more dynamic visual flair, emphasizing the spectacular possibilities of his abilities. Sue Storm's redesign emphasized her role as a powerful superhero rather than a supporting character. Lee's version of the Invisible Woman was confident, assertive, and visually striking, with a costume design that conveyed both power and femininity. Her force field abilities were showcased through elaborate visual effects that made her one of the team's most formidable members. Johnny Storm received perhaps the most significant visual update, with Lee's version featuring a more elaborate and spectacular approach to his flame powers. The Human Torch's flying sequences were choreographed like action movie set pieces, with trails of fire and explosive effects that had rarely been attempted in previous comic book interpretations. Ben Grimm's Thing was redesigned to be more imposing and visually impressive than ever before. Lee's version was larger and more dramatically sculpted, with rocky skin that looked more like actual stone than the softer interpretations that had sometimes appeared in earlier comics. The character's strength and durability were emphasized through more spectacular action sequences and more impressive displays of power. The supporting cast and villains were similarly updated, with classic characters receiving modern makeovers that were designed to appeal to contemporary readers. Doctor Doom's armor was more elaborate and technologically advanced, while maintaining the essential elements that had made the character iconic. Brandon Choi, Lee's writing partner on the Heroes Reborn Fantastic Four, brought his own modern sensibilities to the storytelling aspects of the relaunch. Choi's approach emphasized faster pacing, more action-oriented plots, and dialogue that was designed to sound natural to contemporary readers rather than reflecting the more formal speech patterns of earlier comic book writing. The story structure of the Heroes Reborn Fantastic Four was significantly different from the original series. Instead of the episodic adventures that had characterized much of the classic run, Choi crafted longer story arcs that built toward major climaxes and revelations. This approach was more in line with contemporary comic book storytelling trends and the expectations of readers who were accustomed to more serialized narratives. Choi's handling of the team's family dynamics was both more explicit and more contemporary than previous interpretations. The relationships between the four main characters were explored through dialogue and situations that reflected modern understanding of family psychology and interpersonal relationships. The conflicts between team members were more openly discussed and resolved through communication rather than simply being ignored or glossed over. The scientific and technological elements of the series were updated to reflect contemporary understanding of physics, genetics, and other relevant fields, while still maintaining the pseudo-scientific elements that were essential to the Fantastic Four concept. Choi tried to ground the team's adventures in explanations that would seem plausible to readers who were more scientifically literate than audiences from earlier decades. The pacing of individual issues was accelerated to match contemporary expectations about comic book storytelling, rather than the more leisurely approach that had characterized much of the original series. Heroes Reborn Fantastic Four delivered more action and plot development per issue, with less time spent on exposition and character reflection. One of the most notable aspects of the Heroes Reborn Fantastic Four was its approach to classic villains and concepts from the original series. Rather than creating entirely new threats, Lee and Choi chose to reintroduce updated versions of classic antagonists, giving contemporary readers a chance to experience modernized versions of legendary storylines. Dr. Doom's appearance in the Heroes Reborn universe was one of the most anticipated elements of the relaunch. Lee's redesign of the character maintained all of the visual elements that had made Doom iconic while adding contemporary details and more sophisticated armor design. Choi's writing portrayed Doom as more psychologically complex than some previous interpretations, with clearer motivations and more nuanced relationships with the protagonists. The reintroduction of Galactus and the Silver Surfer provided an opportunity to showcase Lee's artistic abilities on some of the most visually spectacular concepts in the Marvel Universe. These cosmic entities were rendered with a level of detail and dynamic energy that had rarely been achieved in previous comics, demonstrating the potential of modern artistic techniques when applied to classic concepts. Other classic villains, including the Puppet Master and various alternate dimension threats, were similarly updated and reintroduced throughout the run. Each reappearance was treated as an opportunity to show how contemporary creators could build on classic foundations while still bringing fresh perspectives to familiar material. The approach had both advantages and disadvantages. On the positive side, it allowed new readers to experience classic Fantastic Four concepts without having to navigate decades of continuity and previous interpretations. The updated versions were often more visually impressive and dramatically compelling than their original appearances. However, the greatest hits approach also limited the creative team's ability to develop truly original concepts and storylines. Much of the run felt like a retelling of classic stories rather than a genuinely new take on the Fantastic Four concept, which may have disappointed readers who were hoping for more innovative approaches to the characters. The visual presentation of Heroes Reborn Fantastic Four represented a significant advance over most contemporary comic books in terms of production values and artistic sophistication. Lee's art was supported by state-of-the-art coloring and printing techniques that allowed for more subtle gradations and more spectacular effects than had been possible in earlier decades. Lee's page layouts were more cinematic than most previous comic book art, with panel arrangements and visual storytelling techniques that were influenced by contemporary film and television. Action sequences were choreographed with particular attention to flow and movement, creating a sense of momentum and excitement that drew readers into the story. The character designs throughout the series reflected contemporary fashion and aesthetic sensibilities while still maintaining the iconic elements that made the characters recognizable. Costumes were more detailed and textured than previous versions, with functional elements and technological details that made them seem more realistic and practical. The backgrounds and settings were rendered with particular care and attention to detail. Lee's version of New York City felt more contemporary and realistic than many previous comic book interpretations, while the various alternate dimensions and alien worlds were designed with visual consistency and imaginative flair. The special effects throughout the series, from Reed's stretching abilities to Johnny's flame powers to Sue's force fields, were rendered with a level of detail and visual impact that set new standards for superhero comic book art. These sequences were often designed as showcases for Lee's artistic abilities, but they also served important story functions by making the character's abilities seem more impressive and dramatically significant. Despite the high expectations and significant financial investment, the Heroes Reborn experiment was ultimately short-lived. Jim Lee completed only the first 6 issues of Fantastic Four before departing to focus on other projects, leaving the series in the hands of other creators who struggled to maintain the visual standards and creative vision that he had established. The issues that followed Lee's departure were competent, but lacked the distinctive style and energy that had made the initial issues special. Various artists attempted to match Lee's approach, but without his particular combination of skills and vision, the series began to feel more generic and less distinctive. The writing during the post-Lee period also struggled to maintain consistency and direction. Different writers brought different approaches to the characters and their world, but without a unifying vision, the series began to feel disjointed and uncertain about its own identity. S.H.I.E.L.D, the commercial performance of Heroes Reborn Fantastic Four, was mixed at best. While the initial issues generated significant sales and media attention, interest declined rapidly as the novelty wore off and the creative team changes became apparent. The series failed to attract the sustained readership that Marvel had hoped for, and it became clear that the experiment was not achieving its commercial goals. More fundamentally, the Heroes Reborn approach highlighted some of the inherent problems with trying to completely reinvent classic characters. While the updated designs and contemporary storytelling techniques had their appeal, they couldn't entirely replace the emotional connections and narrative depth that had been built up over decades of continuous publication. The series came to an end after only 13 issues, bringing the Heroes Reborn experiment to a close much sooner than anyone had anticipated. The failure was not due to lack of talent or effort on the part of the creators involved, but rather to the difficulty of the task they had been asked to perform, creating something that was both completely new and essentially familiar, both contemporary and timeless. In 1998, Marvel Comics made the decision to bring the Fantastic Four back to the main Marvel universe, ending the Heroes Reborn experiment and returning the characters to their original continuity. The transition was handled through a crossover storyline that revealed the Heroes Reborn universe to be an alternate dimension created by Franklin Richards' reality warping powers, allowing the original versions of the characters to return without negating the experiences of the reboot. The return of the Fantastic Four to mainstream Marvel continuity was welcomed by many longtime fans who had felt disconnected from the Heroes Reborn versions of the characters. However, the transition also presented significant creative challenges, as the returning series needed to re-establish its place in the Marvel Universe while also proving that it could avoid the problems that had led to its original cancellation. Scott Lobdell was initially chosen to write the relaunched series, bringing his experience with team dynamics and character development to the task of reintegrating the Fantastic Four into the larger Marvel Universe. However, Lobdell's run was brief and relatively unremarkable, serving more as a transitional period than as a distinctive creative statement. The early issues of the relaunched series focused primarily on re-establishing the characters' relationships with each other and with the broader Marvel universe. Stories dealt with the psychological aftermath of their experiences in the Heroes Reborn dimension, while also addressing practical questions about their place in a world that had moved on without them. The art during this period was handled by various competent but not exceptional artists who were tasked with creating a visual style that would bridge the gap between the Heroes Reborn aesthetic and the classic Marvel approach. The result was professional but somewhat generic artwork that served the stories without adding much distinctive visual character. The commercial reception of the relaunched series was initially positive, as curiosity about the character's return generated strong sales for the first several issues. However, it quickly became apparent that reader interest was not being sustained, and sales began to decline as the novelty of the return wore off. The true revitalization of the Fantastic Four came in 2002, when writer Mark Waid and artist Mike Wieringo took over the series with issue 60 of the third volume. This creative team brought a fresh perspective to the characters while maintaining deep respect for their classic elements, creating what many consider to be the third golden age of the Fantastic Four. Mark Waid approached the series with a clear understanding of what had made the original Lee Kirby run so special, while also recognizing the need to update the concept for contemporary readers. His writing emphasized the sense of wonder and discovery that had been central to the series' appeal, while also developing more sophisticated character relationships and more complex storytelling structures. Waid's Reed Richards was portrayed as a man driven by insatiable curiosity about the universe, whose scientific discoveries often led the team into dangerous but fascinating adventures. Rather than depicting Reed's intellectualism as cold or distant, Waid showed how his passion for discovery was itself an expression of his love for his family and his desire to make the world a better place. Sue Storm, under Waid's pen, continued to develop as both a powerful superhero and a complex individual with her own goals and motivations. Waid was particularly skilled at showing Sue's role as the emotional center of the team, the person who kept the family together while also pursuing her own interests and ambitions. Johnny Storm's character development during this period was particularly notable, as Waid moved him beyond the simple hot-headed teenager archetype and showed him maturing into a genuine hero with real depth and complexity. Johnny's relationships with his teammates became more nuanced and adult, while his role in the team evolved from junior member to full partner. Ben Grimm remained the heart and soul of the team under Waid's writing, but his character was given new dimensions and challenges that kept him from becoming a one-note tragic figure. Waid's Ben was fully realized as both a superhero and a human being, with genuine friendships, romantic relationships, and personal growth that made him one of the most relatable characters in comics. Mike Wieringo's art was the perfect complement to Waid's writing, combining clean, dynamic visual storytelling with expressive character work that brought out the emotional depth of the scripts. Wieringo's style was modern without being trendy, sophisticated without being pretentious, and exciting without being overwhelming. Wieringo's character designs updated the classic Fantastic Four look while maintaining all of the iconic elements that made them instantly recognizable. His Reed Richards was both intellectually intense and physically heroic. His Sue Storm was both beautiful and powerful. His Johnny Storm was both youthful and mature. And his Ben Grimm was both imposing and sympathetic. The visual storytelling throughout Waid and Wieringo's run was exceptional, with page layouts that enhanced the narrative flow and panel arrangements that drew readers into the story. Action sequences were choreographed with particular skill, creating a sense of movement and excitement that made the characters' abilities seem both impressive and believable. One of the most ambitious and successful storylines of the Waid-Wieringo era was Unthinkable, a multi-part epic that saw Dr. Doom abandon his scientific approach in favor of mastering the mystical arts. This storyline demonstrated the creative team's ability to take classic Fantastic Four concepts and explore them from completely new angles. The basic premise of Unthinkable was that Victor Von Doom had realized that his scientific approach to defeating Reed Richards was fundamentally flawed, since Reed would always be his equal or superior in that arena. By embracing magic instead of science, Doom gained access to powers and abilities that Reed couldn't counter with traditional scientific methods. The storyline worked on multiple levels, serving as both an exciting adventure and a philosophical exploration of the relationship between science and magic, reason and faith, the known and the unknown. Waid used Doom's transformation to examine Reed's limitations as well as his strengths, showing how his reliance on scientific rationality could sometimes blind him to other forms of truth and power. The visual representation of the magical elements was handled with particular skill by Wieringo, who created spell effects and magical environments that felt both fantastical and threatening. His design for the magically empowered Doctor Doom was particularly effective, maintaining the character's iconic appearance while adding mystical elements that made him seem more dangerous and unpredictable than ever before. The storyline's impact on the Fantastic Four themselves was profound and lasting. Reed's inability to solve the problem through scientific means forced him to rely more heavily on his teammates and to accept help from magical allies like Doctor Strange. Sue's force fields proved surprisingly effective against magical attacks, giving her a more central role in the team's eventual victory. Johnny and Ben were both forced to confront threats that their powers couldn't easily overcome, leading to character development that showed their growth beyond their original archetypes. Sue's force fields proved surprisingly effective against magical attacks, giving her a more central role in the team's eventual victory. And of truth, Sue sounds when you mentor both forced to confront threats that their powers couldn't easily overcome, leading to character development that showed their growth beyond earth to dopey and no. Denied worlds, 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 denied worlds. The experience brought the team closer together while also highlighting their individual strengths and limitations. The resolution of Unthinkable was both satisfying and thoughtful, with Doom's defeat coming not through superior power, but through the team's willingness to work together and think creatively about their situation. The storyline established Wade and Wieringo as creators who understood both the classic appeal of the Fantastic Four and the potential for new approaches to familiar concepts. One of the most significant developments during the Wade-Wieringo run was Marvel's decision to return the Fantastic Four to its original numbering, with issue 500 acknowledging the series' long history while also celebrating its enduring appeal. This decision was both symbolic and practical, recognizing that the Fantastic Four's legacy was one of its greatest assets. The milestone 500th issue was treated as a major celebration of the series' history, featuring guest appearances by numerous classic characters and references to decades of previous storylines. However, rather than simply being a nostalgia fest, the issue also served as a launching point for new adventures and character developments. Wade and Wieringo used the transition to original numbering as an opportunity to reaffirm their commitment to the essential elements that made the Fantastic Four special, while also demonstrating their intention to continue pushing the characters and concepts in new directions. The milestone issue was both a celebration of the past and a promise for the future. The return to original numbering also had practical benefits for collectors and longtime fans who had been frustrated by the various renumbering schemes that had been implemented over the years. By acknowledging the series' complete publication history, Marvel was showing respect for the characters' legacy and for the fans who had supported them through various creative transitions. The commercial success of the milestone issue demonstrated that there was still strong interest in the Fantastic Four when they were handled by creators who understood their appeal. Sales figures for issue 500 were significantly higher than recent averages, suggesting that the Wade-Wieringo approach was resonating with both longtime fans and new readers. When Mark Waid left the Fantastic Four in 2005, he was succeeded by J. Michael Strazinski, a writer best known for his work in television and his acclaimed run on The Amazing Spider-Man. Strazinski brought his experience with complex serialized storytelling and character development to Marvel's first family. Though his run would prove to be more controversial and less universally acclaimed than his predecessors, Straczynski's approach to the Fantastic Four emphasized the cosmic and science fiction elements that had always been part of the series' appeal. But he also introduced darker and more complex themes that were sometimes at odds with the family-friendly tone that many fans associated with the characters. His stories often dealt with moral ambiguity and difficult choices that had no clear right answers. The art during Straczynski's run was handled by Mike McKone and others, who brought their own interpretations to the characters while maintaining visual consistency with the established Marvel house style. The artwork was professional and effective, but it sometimes lacked the distinctive personality that had made the Wieringo era so memorable. One of Strazinski's most controversial decisions was to have Reed Richards develop technology that could peer into possible futures, allowing him to see potential consequences of current actions. This concept raised philosophical questions about free will and determinism that were intellectually interesting but sometimes made the stories feel overly cerebral and detached from emotional concerns. Straczynski's run was also marked by numerous crossover events and tie-ins to larger Marvel storylines, which sometimes interrupted the flow of his ongoing narratives and forced the series to serve external continuity requirements rather than its own storytelling needs. While these crossovers were commercially successful, they sometimes came at the expense of character development and series-specific storytelling. Despite these challenges, Straczynski did produce some memorable storylines during his tenure, including explorations of Reed and Sue's relationship and investigations into the cosmic forces that had given the team their powers. His work was always professionally crafted and intellectually ambitious, even when it didn't entirely succeed in capturing the emotional appeal that made the Fantastic Four special. Following Straczynski's departure, the Fantastic Four was taken over by the creative team of Mark Millar and Brian Hitch, two British creators who had already established themselves as major forces in contemporary superhero comics through their work on the Ultimates and other high-profile projects. Millar's approach to the Fantastic Four was consciously cinematic, with storylines that were designed to feel like big-budget science fiction films. Translated to the comic book medium, his writing emphasized spectacular action sequences and high-concept science fiction ideas, while also developing the celebrity aspects of the characters' public personas. Brian Hitch's art was perfectly suited to Millar's vision, with detailed, realistic renderings that gave the fantastic elements of the stories a sense of weight and believability. Hitch's backgrounds were particularly impressive, creating convincing versions of both familiar Earth locations and exotic alien environments. The Millar-Hitch run was notable for its exploration of the Fantastic Four as celebrities and public figures, showing how their roles as Earth's premier superhero team had made them into media personalities with all the benefits and drawbacks that such status entailed. This approach was both contemporary and logical, acknowledging how such individuals would actually be treated in the modern world. The science fiction concepts introduced during this run were ambitious and visually spectacular, including explorations of alternate dimensions, time travel, and cosmic-level threats. Millar's background in writing for different media helped him create scenarios that were both comics-friendly and potentially adaptable to other formats. However, the Millar-Hitch approach sometimes emphasized spectacle over character development, and their stories occasionally felt more like concept showcases than emotionally engaging narratives. While their work was undeniably impressive from a technical standpoint, it didn't always capture the family dynamics that were central to the Fantastic Four's appeal. The run was also marked by delays and scheduling problems that prevented it from maintaining the momentum that monthly publication typically provides. While the individual issues were generally high quality, the irregular schedule made it difficult for readers to maintain their emotional investment in ongoing storylines. As the 2000s drew to a close, the Fantastic Four had been through several different creative interpretations, each bringing their own strengths and weaknesses to the series. The Wade Wieringo era had proven that the characters could still support excellent storytelling when handled by creators who understood their essential appeal, while subsequent runs had explored different aspects of their potential. The stage was being set for what would become one of the most ambitious and acclaimed runs in the series' history, as writer Jonathan Hickman was preparing to take over the title with a vision that would expand the scope and complexity of the Fantastic Four concept in unprecedented ways. The various creative experiments of the early 2000s had demonstrated both the possibilities and the challenges inherent in the Fantastic Four concept. The characters were robust enough to support very different creative approaches, but they worked best when their family relationships and sense of wonder remained central to the storytelling. S.H.I.E.L.D. The commercial performance of the series during this period had been variable, with some runs attracting strong sales and critical acclaim while others struggled to find their audience. However, the overall trend suggested that there was still significant interest in the characters when they were handled by creators who understood their unique appeal. The foundation had been laid for a new era of Fantastic Four storytelling that would honor the series' classic elements while also pushing the characters and concepts into new territory. The lessons learned from the various creative experiments of the previous decades would inform the approaches of future creators, helping them avoid past mistakes while building on proven successes. In 2009, writer Jonathan Hickman took over the Fantastic Four with a vision so comprehensive and ambitious that it would fundamentally reshape not just the series but the entire cosmic corner of the Marvel Universe. Hickman came to the title with a background in architecture and design, bringing a structural approach to storytelling that emphasized long-term planning, thematic consistency, and interconnected plotting on a scale rarely seen in superhero comics. Hickman's approach to the Fantastic Four was built on the understanding that Reed Richards was, at his core, a man who believed that any problem could be solved through the application of sufficient intelligence and scientific method. This characterization became the foundation for stories that explored the limits of human knowledge and the unintended consequences of trying to fix a universe that might be more complex than any one mind could comprehend. The visual presentation of Hickman's Fantastic Four was initially handled by Dale Eaglesham and later by Steve Epting, both artists whose realistic, detailed styles provided the perfect complement to Hickman's complex plotting and high-concept science fiction. The art emphasized the scale and scope of Hickman's cosmic concepts while never losing sight of the human emotions that drove the characters. From his very first issue, Hickman demonstrated that he was playing a longer game than most comic book writers. Seeds planted in early stories would pay off months or even years later, creating a sense of narrative inevitability that made his run feel like a single, cohesive work rather than a collection of individual storylines. The scope of Hickman's vision extended far beyond Earth and even beyond the traditional boundaries of the Marvel Universe. His stories dealt with multiversal concepts, alternate timeline branches, and cosmic entities whose conflicts played out over geological timescales. Yet, despite this enormous scope, the emotional center of his stories remained the relationships between Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben. Hickman's Reed Richards was portrayed as a man whose genius had become both a blessing and a curse. His ability to see solutions to complex problems was matched by his tendency to pursue those solutions regardless of personal cost, creating tensions within his family that would drive many of the run's most dramatic moments. One of Hickman's most significant and controversial concepts was the Council of Reeds, a multiversal organization composed of alternate versions of Reed Richards from across the dimensional spectrum. This concept allowed Hickman to explore the character's essential nature by showing what he might become under different circumstances and with different moral constraints. The Council represented Reed's greatest strength taken to its logical extreme, the belief that scientific rationality could solve any problem, including the problem of human suffering itself. The alternate Reeds had formed their organization to share knowledge and coordinate their efforts to improve conditions throughout the multiverse, regardless of the wishes of the populations they were trying to help. The moral implications of the Council's activities provided rich material for character development and philosophical exploration. These alternate Reeds had essentially appointed themselves as the universe's guardians and problem solvers, but their methods often involved manipulation, deception, and the violation of free will on a massive scale. The main Marvel Universe's Reed Richards was invited to join the Council, creating a temptation that struck at the heart of his character. Here was an opportunity to collaborate with versions of himself who had solved problems that had plagued him for years, including finding a cure for Ben's condition and achieving lasting peace between various cosmic factions. The Council's storyline also provided opportunities to explore Sue's perspective on Reed's obsessions and ambitions. Her growing concern about Reed's involvement with his alternate selves reflected her understanding that his greatest strength, his desire to help others through scientific discovery, could also become his greatest weakness if taken too far. The resolution of the Council arc demonstrated Hickman's skill at creating satisfying conclusions to complex, long-running storylines. Reed's ultimate decision to reject the Council's approach and destroy their interdimensional meeting place was both emotionally satisfying and thematically consistent with the character's essential humanity. Hickman's treatment of Reed and Sue's children, Franklin and Valeria, was one of the most sophisticated and emotionally resonant aspects of his run. Rather than treating the children as simple plot devices or sources of unlimited power, Hickman developed them as fully realized characters with their own personalities, relationships, and character arcs. Franklin Richards, whose reality warping abilities had made him one of the most powerful beings in the Marvel Universe, was portrayed as a child struggling to understand and control abilities that dwarfed those of his parents. Hickman's Franklin was genuinely childlike in his interests and concerns, but his powers meant that his childhood games and fears could have cosmic consequences. The relationship between Franklin and his father was explored with particular depth and sensitivity. Reed's scientific mind struggled to comprehend his son's abilities, which seemed to operate according to rules that defied conventional understanding. This created a generation gap that was both touching and potentially dangerous. Valeria Richards, Reed and Sue's daughter, was portrayed as inheriting her father's intellectual gifts while also possessing her mother's emotional intelligence and strength. Despite her young age, Valeria often served as the voice of reason within the family, seeing connections and solutions that escaped even Reed's attention. The dynamic between Franklin and Valeria was one of the most charming aspects of Hickman's run. Their sibling relationship felt genuine and natural, with the typical conflicts and affections that characterize real family relationships. Yet their extraordinary circumstances also created unique challenges and opportunities for both characters. Hickman used the children to explore themes of legacy and responsibility that were central to the Fantastic Four concept. Reed and Sue weren't just superheroes protecting the world, they were parents trying to raise children who might be more powerful than their parents could possibly imagine. The challenges of superpowered parenting provided material for both humor and drama throughout the run. One of Hickman's most ambitious concepts was the Future Foundation, Reed Richards' attempt to create an educational institution that would inspire and train the next generation of scientists, inventors, and problem solvers. The foundation represented Reed's belief that the universe's problems could be solved through the application of brilliant minds working together toward common goals. The foundation brought together gifted children from various backgrounds and species, creating a diverse community of young learners who would be trained in advanced scientific concepts and encouraged to think creatively about solutions to complex problems. The concept allowed Hickman to explore educational philosophy and child development in ways that were both intellectually interesting and dramatically compelling. The visual design of the Future Foundation, including the distinctive white and blue costumes worn by its members, represented a departure from the classic Fantastic Four aesthetic, while still maintaining the series' essential identity. The costume change was controversial among some fans, but it served important narrative purposes by symbolizing the team's evolution and growth. The Foundation's curriculum included not just traditional scientific subjects, but also courses in ethics, philosophy, and interpersonal relationships. Hickman understood that creating better problem solvers wasn't just about teaching them facts and formulas, it was about helping them develop the wisdom and moral judgment necessary to use their abilities responsibly. The diverse membership of the Future Foundation allowed Hickman to introduce new characters and concepts while also developing existing ones in new directions. Students included human children, young Inhumans, and even reformed villains, creating a community that reflected the diverse nature of the Marvel Universe. The Foundation concept also provided opportunities to explore Reed's role as a mentor and teacher. His interactions with the Foundation's students revealed aspects of his personality that weren't always visible in his superhero activities, showing his genuine care for young people and his desire to inspire them to achieve their potential. The most shocking and emotionally devastating moment of Hickman's run was the apparent death of Johnny Storm in issue 587. This storyline demonstrated Hickman's willingness to make permanent changes to the series' status quo while also exploring the emotional consequences of loss and grief within the family dynamic. Johnny's death came as the result of his heroic sacrifice to save the lives of Reed's children and the other members of the Future Foundation. Trapped in the negative zone and facing impossible odds, Johnny chose to stay behind and hold off an army of hostile creatures while his family escaped to safety. His final words, transmitted through his communicator as he prepared to make his last stand, were both heartbreaking and heroic. The impact of Johnny's death on the remaining family members was explored with remarkable depth and sensitivity. Reed's guilt over losing his brother-in-law drove him to obsessive attempts to find a way to bring Johnny back, while Sue struggled with grief and anger over the loss of her beloved younger brother. Ben, who had always had a special relationship with Johnny despite their constant bickering, was devastated by the loss of his closest friend. The death also had practical implications for the team's structure and identity. For the first time in their history, the Fantastic Four were no longer four, raising questions about whether they could continue to function as a family unit. The decision to recruit Spider-Man as Johnny's temporary replacement was both logical and emotionally complex, as Peter Parker tried to fill a role that could never truly be replaced. Hickman used Johnny's absence to explore how the family dynamics changed when one crucial element was removed. Reed became more distant and obsessed, Sue became more protective of her remaining family members, and Ben struggled with feelings of guilt and responsibility for not being able to save his friend. The storyline also allowed Hickman to examine themes of legacy and memory, as the surviving family members tried to honor Johnny's sacrifice while also moving forward with their lives. The Future Foundation became, in part, a memorial to Johnny's belief in the potential of young people to create a better future. Following Johnny's apparent death, Hickman made the bold decision to replace the Fantastic Four title with FF, initially standing for Future Foundation but later revealed to also mean Fantastic Four in recognition of the team's enduring identity. This title change represented more than just a marketing gimmick means. It reflected fundamental changes in the series' focus and structure. The FF comic became primarily focused on the activities of the Future Foundation and the education of its young members. While Reed, Sue, and Ben continued to appear and remained important characters, the spotlight shifted to include the Foundation's students and their development as both individuals and as a team. This approach allowed Hickman to explore different types of storytelling than were possible in a traditional superhero comic. Educational scenes, character development moments, and philosophical discussions became as important as action sequences and cosmic battles. The result was a comic that felt fresh and innovative while still maintaining clear connections to the Fantastic Four's classic elements. The visual design of the FF comic was distinctly different from its predecessor, with the white and blue color scheme creating a cleaner, more futuristic aesthetic. The costume changes weren't just cosmetic means, they represented the characters' evolution and their commitment to building a better future rather than simply reacting to present threats. Spider-Man's inclusion in the team during this period was handled with particular skill, as Hickman found ways to integrate Peter Parker's personality and abilities into the group dynamic without simply making him a replacement for Johnny Storm. Peter's relationship with the Foundation's students was especially well developed, showing his natural ability to connect with young people and inspire them to achieve their potential. The FF title also allowed Hickman to develop supporting characters who had been introduced earlier in his run, giving them more prominent roles and more detailed character development. Characters like Dragon Man, the Molecule Man, and various Inhuman allies became central to the stories rather than simply appearing as guest stars or plot devices. As Hickman's run progressed, the scope of his storytelling expanded to encompass not just the Marvel Universe but the entire multiverse, with consequences that would ripple through Marvel Comics for years to come. His exploration of alternate realities and parallel dimensions laid the groundwork for events that would eventually culminate in the destruction and recreation of the entire Marvel multiverse. The concept of multiversal decay, introduced during Hickman's run, suggested that the very structure of reality was breaking down due to the actions of various cosmic entities and scientific experiments. This concept provided a scientific explanation for the instability that had long plagued comic book continuity, while also setting up conflicts that would require unprecedented cooperation between heroes and villains. Reed Richards' role as one of the multiverse's premier scientific minds made him a central figure in these cosmic events, but Hickman was careful to show that even Reed's genius had limits when faced with problems of such enormous scope. The multiverse was simply too complex for any one individual to understand completely, requiring collaborative efforts and difficult sacrifices from multiple parties. The exploration of alternate realities also allowed Hickman to examine different versions of the Fantastic Four and their supporting cast, showing how different circumstances might have shaped their development. These alternate versions weren't just curiosities, they were integral to the larger narrative about the nature of heroism and the importance of family bonds. The multiversal elements of Hickman's run also connected to his work on other Marvel titles, creating a unified narrative that spanned multiple series and years of publication. This approach demonstrated the potential for long-term planning and coordination in shared universe storytelling, even as it raised questions about the sustainability of such complex plotting. Hickman's run reached its climax with the revelation that Johnny Storm was not actually dead, but had been trapped in the negative zone and gradually working his way back to Earth through a series of adventures that had transformed him from the impulsive young man he had been into a more mature and experienced hero. Johnny's return was handled with both emotional satisfaction and narrative logic, as Hickman revealed that the apparent death had been part of a larger plan to protect the family from cosmic threats that required Johnny to develop new abilities and perspectives. The reunion between Johnny and his family was one of the most emotionally powerful moments in the entire run. The restoration of the Fantastic Four name and the return to the classic blue costumes represented a completion of the character arcs that Hickman had been developing throughout his tenure. The family had been tested, separated, and transformed, but their essential bonds had proven stronger than any external threat or internal conflict. The final issues of Hickman's run provided satisfying conclusions to the various plot threads and character developments that had been woven throughout his stories. The Future Foundation continued to exist, but now as part of the larger Fantastic Four family rather than as a replacement for it. The multiversal threats had been addressed, though not entirely resolved, setting up conflicts that would continue in other titles. Perhaps most importantly, Hickman's conclusion reaffirmed the central truth of the Fantastic Four concept, that family bonds and mutual love could overcome any challenge, no matter how cosmic in scope or complex in nature. The series ended with the four heroes standing together, ready to face whatever new adventures awaited them, their relationship stronger than ever despite all they had endured. Following Jonathan Hickman's departure from the Fantastic Four in 2013, Marvel Comics entered a period characterized by frequent creative changes, multiple reboots, and an editorial approach that seemed to prioritize short-term commercial considerations over long-term storytelling consistency. This era would prove to be one of the most frustrating and unstable periods in the series' history, as various talented creators struggled to establish lasting visions for the characters within a corporate environment that seemed determined to constantly reinvent them. The industry landscape of the 2010s was very different from the comic book world that had nurtured the Fantastic Four's greatest creative periods. The rise of digital comics, the influence of superhero movies on publishing decisions, and the increasing importance of trade paperback collections had fundamentally altered how comics were created, marketed, and consumed. Publishers were under pressure to produce content that would work across multiple media platforms, often at the expense of the kind of long-term character development that had made classic comic runs so memorable. Marvel's approach to the Fantastic Four during this period seemed to reflect a fundamental uncertainty about what role the characters should play in the contemporary comic book landscape. The family dynamics and scientific adventure elements that had defined the series for decades were sometimes viewed as old-fashioned or incompatible with modern storytelling sensibilities, leading to various attempts to update or reimagine the concept in ways that often felt forced or artificial. The constant creative changes during this period made it difficult for any single vision to take hold and develop naturally. Just as readers were beginning to adjust to one creative team's interpretation of the characters, a new writer and artist would take over with a completely different approach, creating a sense of instability and uncertainty that affected both the quality of the stories and the commercial performance of the series. The editorial oversight during this period was often heavy-handed, with storylines being altered or abandoned to accommodate crossover events, media tie-ins, or corporate mandates that had little to do with the specific needs of the Fantastic Four series. This kind of external interference made it even more difficult for creative teams to develop coherent long-term narratives that could build reader investment and loyalty. Matt Fraction, a writer who had earned acclaim for his work on titles like Invincible Iron Man and Hawkeye, took over the Fantastic Four in 2012 with artist Mark Bagley, bringing high expectations and considerable talent to the series. However, their run would prove to be disappointingly brief and largely unsuccessful, demonstrating the challenges facing even accomplished creators working within the constraints of the contemporary Marvel editorial environment. Fraction's approach to the Fantastic Four emphasized family dynamics and character relationships, which seemed like a natural fit for the series' core strengths. His initial storylines explored the challenges of maintaining family bonds while dealing with cosmic responsibilities, touching on themes that had been central to the series since its inception. However, his execution often felt forced and artificial, as if he were trying too hard to capture elements that had worked naturally for previous creative teams. The plotting during Fraction's run was often confusing and overly complex, with storylines that seemed to change direction without warning and character motivations that were difficult to understand or follow. Part of this may have been due to editorial interference or the pressure to tie into larger Marvel Universe events, but the result was a series that felt unfocused and uncertain about its own identity and goals. Mark Bagley's art was competent and professional, but it lacked the distinctive personality that had characterized the series' most successful visual periods. His version of the characters was recognizable and well executed, but it didn't bring any new insights or perspectives to their presentation. The overall visual package felt generic and uninspired, like a house-style interpretation rather than a unique creative vision. The commercial performance of the Fraction Bagley run was disappointing, with sales declining steadily throughout their tenure. Critical reception was similarly mixed, with reviewers acknowledging the creator's talent while expressing frustration with the execution and direction of the series. The run felt like a missed opportunity, given the proven abilities of both creators. The brief duration of Fraction and Bagley's tenure, lasting only 16 issues, became emblematic of the instability that characterized the Fantastic Four during this period. Even when Marvel recruited high-profile creators with proven track records, they seemed unable to provide the kind of editorial support and long-term commitment that would allow those creators to develop their visions fully. Following Fraction's departure, the Fantastic Four was handed to James Robinson, a British writer best known for his acclaimed work on Starman and other DC Comics titles. Robinson brought a deep appreciation for superhero history and mythology to the series, along with a proven ability to develop complex character relationships and long-term storylines. However, his run would also prove to be brief and ultimately unsuccessful. Robinson's approach to the Fantastic Four was consciously nostalgic, drawing heavily on classic elements from the series' golden age while trying to update them for contemporary readers. His stories featured appearances by classic villains like Doctor Doom and Galactus, along with explorations of cosmic concepts and alternate dimensions that had been central to the series' appeal during its most successful periods. The writing during Robinson's run was generally solid and professional, with clear storytelling and well-developed character interactions. Robinson demonstrated a good understanding of what had made the Fantastic Four special during their classic period, and he made genuine efforts to recapture that magic, while still addressing contemporary concerns and sensibilities. However, Robinson's run was hampered by the same editorial instability and commercial pressures that had affected his predecessor. His long-term plans for the series were repeatedly interrupted by crossover events and corporate mandates, making it difficult for him to develop the kind of coherent, sustained narrative that his approach required. The art during Robinson's tenure was handled by Leonard Kirk and others, who provided competent but unremarkable visual storytelling that served the scripts without adding much distinctive character or energy. The artwork was professional and clear, but it lacked the kind of innovative or inspiring qualities that had distinguished the series' most memorable artistic periods. Perhaps most significantly, Robinson's run was affected by growing rumors about Marvel's plans to cancel the Fantastic Four entirely, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty that made it difficult for both creators and readers to invest fully in the stories being told. The shadow of potential cancellation hung over the series, affecting both the creative approach and the commercial performance. One of the most confusing and frustrating aspects of the Fantastic Four's publication during this period was Marvel's constantly changing approach to numbering and title identity. The series went through multiple renumbering schemes, temporary cancellations, and title changes that made it difficult for both longtime fans and new readers to follow the series' continuity and publication history. The decision to restart the numbering with each new creative team was ostensibly designed to create jumping-on points for new readers and to generate media attention through the marketing of new first issues. However, the practical effect was often to create confusion and frustration among readers who had difficulty determining which issues belonged to which volume of the series. The constant renumbering also made it more difficult for comic book stores to order and stock the series effectively, as the frequent changes in title and numbering created logistical challenges for retailers who were trying to serve both new readers and long-time collectors. The confusion was compounded by Marvel's simultaneous use of legacy numbering that attempted to acknowledge the series' complete publication history while also accommodating the new numbering schemes. Perhaps most problematically, the frequent reboots and renumbering schemes seemed to suggest that Marvel had little confidence in the long-term viability of the Fantastic Four concept. Rather than committing to sustained creative development and consistent publication, the company seemed to be constantly searching for quick fixes and short-term solutions that would boost sales without requiring long-term planning or investment. The numbering confusion was symptomatic of larger problems with Marvel's approach to classic characters during this period. The company seemed to be caught between nostalgia for past successes and uncertainty about how to update those successes for contemporary audiences, resulting in an approach that satisfied neither longtime fans nor new readers. The legacy numbering issue would eventually be resolved through Marvel's Fresh Start initiative, which attempted to bring consistency and clarity to the company's publishing line. However, the damage done during the period of constant renumbering would take years to repair, both in terms of reader trust and market performance. The most shocking development in the Fantastic Four's publishing history came in 2015 when Marvel Comics made the unprecedented decision to cancel the series entirely for the first time since its debut in 1961. The cancellation was officially attributed to declining sales and changing reader preferences, but industry observers widely believed that it was actually the result of corporate politics related to movie rights and licensing agreements. The cancellation came during the period when Marvel Studios was building the Marvel Cinematic Universe, while other studios retained the film rights to various Marvel characters, including the Fantastic Four. 20th Century Fox's ownership of the Fantastic Four movie rights had been a source of ongoing frustration for Marvel, particularly given the poor reception of Fox's various attempts to adapt the characters for film. Industry speculation suggested that Marvel's decision to cancel the Fantastic Four comic series was part of a broader strategy to de-emphasize characters whose movie rights were controlled by other studios, in order to focus attention and resources on properties that Marvel Studios could use in their own films. This approach, if true, represented a significant departure from traditional comic book publishing strategies, which had generally prioritized storytelling and character development over media synergy considerations. The cancellation was announced with relatively little fanfare, as if Marvel was hoping to minimize attention to what was obviously a controversial decision. The final issue, Fantastic Four number 645, attempted to provide some closure to ongoing storylines while also leaving the door open for potential future revivals of the characters. Fan reaction to the cancellation was overwhelmingly negative, with longtime readers expressing anger and disappointment over what they saw as the sacrifice of comic book storytelling integrity for corporate financial considerations. Petitions were organized, social media campaigns were launched, and industry professionals spoke out against the decision, but Marvel remained committed to their course of action. The cancellation also had practical implications for the broader Marvel universe, as the Fantastic Four had been integral to many ongoing storylines and character relationships. Other series had to adjust their narratives to account for the absence of Reed Richards, Sue Storm, Johnny Storm, and Ben Grimm, creating ripple effects throughout the Marvel publishing line. Perhaps most significantly, the cancellation represented a break with one of the fundamental principles that had guided Marvel Comics since its inception. The idea that good storytelling and strong characters would ultimately find their audience regardless of external commercial considerations. The decision to cancel the Fantastic Four suggested that this principle was no longer considered inviolate within the contemporary corporate environment. The cancellation of the Fantastic Four created a significant backlash among fans, comic book professionals, and industry observers who viewed the decision as a betrayal of the series' legacy and importance to Marvel Comics history. The response was particularly intense because the cancellation was widely perceived as being motivated by corporate politics rather than creative or commercial considerations related to the comic book medium itself. Social media campaigns organized by fans used hashtags like Save the Fantastic Four and Family First to express their displeasure and demand the series' restoration. These campaigns included not just expressions of nostalgia for past stories but also arguments about the continuing viability and importance of the characters in contemporary comic book storytelling. Professional creators also spoke out against the cancellation, with many expressing concern about the precedent it set for corporate interference in creative decision-making. The decision was seen as an example of how media synergy considerations were beginning to override traditional comic book publishing priorities, potentially threatening the medium's creative independence and artistic integrity. Comic book retailers reported that the cancellation had negative effects on sales of Fantastic Four merchandise and back issues, as fans lost confidence in Marvel's commitment to the characters and became reluctant to invest in related products. The cancellation also affected sales of other Marvel titles that featured the characters as guest stars or supporting players. The absence of the Fantastic Four from the Marvel Universe created noticeable gaps in ongoing storylines and character relationships. Other heroes had to take over roles that had traditionally been filled by Reed Richards and his family, leading to awkward narrative adjustments that highlighted how integral the characters had been to the broader Marvel mythology. Perhaps most importantly, the cancellation damaged Marvel's reputation among fans who viewed it as evidence that the company was prioritizing corporate considerations over the creative and cultural value of their characters. This loss of trust would prove difficult to repair even after the characters were eventually restored to publication. The fan response to the cancellation demonstrated the deep emotional connection that readers had developed with the Fantastic Four over more than 50 years of publication. These weren't just characters in comic books, they were cultural icons whose stories had played important roles in the lives of multiple generations of readers. The cancellation of the Fantastic Four had implications that extended far beyond the specific characters involved, setting precedents and raising questions about the relationship between comic book publishing and other media industries. The decision was widely interpreted as evidence that traditional comic book publishing priorities were being subordinated to broader corporate entertainment strategies. Industry observers noted that the cancellation came during a period when superhero movies were becoming increasingly important to the financial health of comic book publishers. The success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe had demonstrated the potential value of comic book properties in other media, but it had also created pressures to align comic book publishing with movie production schedules and priorities. The Fantastic Four cancellation was seen as a test case for how far publishers would go in subordinating comic book considerations to media synergy goals. The fact that Marvel was willing to cancel one of its most historically important series suggested that no property would be considered sacred if it conflicted with broader corporate strategies. The decision also raised questions about the long-term viability of comic book publishing as an independent creative medium. If publishers were willing to cancel series based on movie rights considerations rather than comic book sales and critical reception, it suggested that the medium was becoming little more than a research and development arm for other entertainment industries. Professional creators expressed concern that the Fantastic Four precedent could be applied to other characters and series, creating an environment where creative decisions would be made based on licensing agreements and media synergy considerations rather than storytelling quality and reader interest. The cancellation also had educational and cultural implications, as the Fantastic Four had been used in academic courses and cultural studies programs as examples of how superhero comics had evolved and influenced American popular culture. The absence of new stories made it more difficult to demonstrate the continuing relevance and vitality of the characters and their concepts. Perhaps most significantly, the cancellation represented a break with the idea that comic book characters were primarily creative and cultural properties rather than simply commercial assets. The decision suggested that even the most beloved and historically important characters could be sacrificed if they conflicted with broader corporate goals and strategies. In 2018, after 3 years of absence from the Marvel Universe, the Fantastic Four returned to publication under the guidance of writer Dan Slott and artist Sara Pichelli. The restoration of the series was greeted with enormous excitement from fans who had been campaigning for the character's return since the 2015 cancellation, and it represented a significant acknowledgement by Marvel that they had made a mistake in removing their first family from publication. Dan Slott brought considerable experience and reputation to the task of reviving the Fantastic Four, having spent nearly a decade as the primary writer of The Amazing Spider-Man, and having proven his ability to handle both classic character elements and contemporary storytelling sensibilities. His approach to the series was explicitly designed to honor the characters' legacy, while also making them accessible to new readers who might be encountering them for the first time. The return was carefully orchestrated to maximize both commercial impact and fan satisfaction. The first issue of the new series was released with significant media attention and multiple variant covers, while also being priced at an accessible level to encourage sampling by readers who might not normally purchase Fantastic Four comics. Marvel clearly wanted to demonstrate that they were committed to making the return a success. Sara Pichelli's art provided the perfect visual complement to Slott's writing, combining dynamic action sequences with expressive character work that captured both the cosmic scope and intimate family dynamics that had always been central to the series' appeal. Her character designs updated the classic Fantastic Four look while maintaining all of the iconic elements that made them instantly recognizable. The early storylines of Slott's run focused on re-establishing the characters' place in the Marvel Universe while also explaining their 3-year absence in ways that felt both narratively satisfying and emotionally genuine. Rather than simply ignoring the gap in publication, Slott created in-universe explanations that acknowledged the passage of time while also setting up new story possibilities. The commercial reception of the relaunched series was overwhelmingly positive, with strong sales figures and critical acclaim that seemed to vindicate fan campaigns for the character's return. The success suggested that there was indeed a significant audience for well-crafted Fantastic Four stories despite Marvel's previous concerns about the character's commercial viability. One of the most challenging aspects of reviving the Fantastic Four was providing a satisfying explanation for where the characters had been during their 3-year absence from the Marvel Universe. S.H.I.E.L.D's solution was both creative and emotionally resonant, revealing that Reed Richards had been working to repair damage to the multiverse that had occurred during previous cosmic events. The explanation tied into continuity from Jonathan Hickman's run and the subsequent Secret Wars event, showing how Reed's scientific genius and sense of responsibility had led him to undertake a mission that required the entire family to work together in dimensions beyond normal space and time. This approach allowed S.H.I.E.L.D. to honor previous storylines while also setting up new adventures and character developments. Sue, Johnny, and Ben's roles in the multiversal repair mission were carefully developed to show how each character's unique abilities and personality traits had been essential to the success of their work. Sue's force fields had provided protection in hostile dimensional environments. Johnny's flame powers had served as beacons and energy sources, and Ben's strength and determination had been crucial for various construction and maintenance tasks. The children, Franklin and Valeria, were shown to have grown and developed during their time away, with new abilities and increased maturity that reflected their extraordinary experiences. Their character development was handled with particular care, showing how they had been affected by their unique upbringing while also maintaining their essential personalities and relationships. The multiversal setting also allowed S.H.I.E.L.D. to introduce new supporting characters and concepts that had been encountered during the family's dimensional travels. These additions expanded the series' mythology while also providing new story possibilities and relationship dynamics that could be explored in future issues. Perhaps most importantly, the explanation for the family's absence was designed to reinforce their bonds with each other and their commitment to using their abilities to help others. Their 3-year mission had been undertaken not for personal gain or scientific curiosity, but out of a sense of moral obligation to repair damage that threatened countless innocent lives across multiple realities. S.H.I.E.L.D's approach to the Fantastic Four's family relationships was consciously contemporary, incorporating modern understanding of family psychology and communication, while still maintaining the essential dynamics that had made the characters special for nearly 60 years. Reed and Sue were portrayed as partners who had learned from their past conflicts and developed more mature approaches to balancing their superhero responsibilities with their family obligations. The marriage between Reed and Sue was shown as stronger than ever, built on decades of shared experiences and deepened by their recent multiversal adventures. S.H.I.E.L.D. was careful to show them as equals who supported each other's individual goals while also working together toward common objectives. Their relationship served as a model for how long-term partnerships could evolve and mature over time. Johnny Storm's character development during S.H.I.E.L.D's run emphasized his growth from impulsive teenager to responsible adult, while still maintaining the enthusiasm and energy that had always been central to his appeal. His relationships with his teammates had evolved into more mature friendships, with less of the juvenile rivalry that had characterized some earlier interpretations. Ben Grimm remained the emotional heart of the team, but S.H.I.E.L.D's version was more comfortable with his condition and more confident in his relationships than previous interpretations had sometimes portrayed. His romance with Alicia Masters was given particular attention, with their relationship serving as another example of how love could transcend physical appearances and external challenges. The children, Franklin and Valeria, were written as real kids with age-appropriate interests and concerns despite their extraordinary abilities and experiences. Their interactions with their parents and uncles felt genuine and natural, avoiding the precocious dialogue that had sometimes plagued child characters in earlier comic books. The extended family of friends and allies around the Fantastic Four was also developed with care and attention, showing how the team's influence extended beyond their immediate family to include a broader network of relationships that enriched their lives and provided additional story possibilities. The villains and threats featured in S.H.I.E.L.D's run were designed to feel both contemporary and timeless, drawing on classic Fantastic Four concepts while updating them for modern sensibilities and current scientific understanding. His approach balanced nostalgia for classic adversaries with the introduction of new challenges that reflected contemporary concerns and possibilities. Doctor Doom remained a central antagonist during S.H.I.E.L.D's tenure, but his portrayal was more complex and nuanced than some previous interpretations. S.H.I.E.L.D's Doom was still arrogant and power-hungry, but he was also shown to have genuine concerns about threats to his homeland and his people. This approach made him a more compelling and three-dimensional character while still maintaining his role as the team's primary nemesis. New villains introduced during S.H.I.E.L.D's run reflected contemporary anxieties about technology, environmental destruction, and social inequality. These characters weren't just powerful opponents for the team to fight, but representatives of real-world concerns that gave the stories additional depth and relevance. The cosmic threats faced by the team during this period were similarly updated, with storylines that incorporated current scientific theories about parallel dimensions, quantum mechanics, and the nature of space and time. S.H.I.E.L.D's background research was evident in stories that felt scientifically plausible while still maintaining the sense of wonder that had always been central to Fantastic Four adventures. The series also featured adventures that took the team to contemporary versions of classic locations like the Negative Zone and Subterranea, showing how these environments had evolved and changed over the decades since their introduction. These updates respected the original concepts while also reflecting advances in scientific understanding and changes in cultural perspectives. Perhaps most importantly, the threats and adventures in S.H.I.E.L.D's run were designed to test the characters' relationships and values rather than just their powers and abilities. Dewey's Boost and Play, Unbeluv, T and Two Sewaits. The most compelling conflicts were those that forced the team members to make difficult choices about their priorities and responsibilities, creating character development opportunities that went beyond simple action sequences. Following Dan Slott's successful revival of the series, writer Ryan North took over the Fantastic Four in 2022, bringing his own distinctive approach to Marvel's first family. North, best known for his work on The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl and various Adventure Time comics, brought a sensibility that emphasized humor, accessibility, and scientific authenticity while still respecting the series' classic elements. North's approach to the Fantastic Four was consciously designed to be welcoming to new readers while also satisfying longtime fans who had been following the characters for decades. His writing style was more conversational and contemporary than some previous interpretations, with dialogue that felt natural and characters who behaved in ways that reflected modern understanding of family dynamics and professional relationships. The scientific elements of North's stories were particularly well-researched and carefully explained, reflecting his own background in computer science and his commitment to making the team's adventures feel plausible within the context of contemporary scientific understanding. His Reed Richards was portrayed as a genuine scientist whose theories and inventions were based on real scientific principles, even when they were extended into fantastic territory. The humor in North's stories was organic and character-based rather than forced or artificial, growing naturally from the personalities and relationships of the team members rather than being imposed from outside. His approach to comedy respected the characters' heroic nature while also acknowledging the inherent absurdity of some superhero situations. The art during North's run was handled by various talented artists who brought their own interpretations to the characters while maintaining visual consistency with the established Marvel house style. The artwork was generally clean and accessible, with clear storytelling and expressive character work that complemented North's writing approach. North's storylines tended to be more episodic and self-contained than some previous runs, making individual issues more accessible to new readers while still building toward larger character developments and plot threads. This approach reflected contemporary reading habits and the realities of trade paperback collection, while also honoring the classic comic book tradition of complete stories and individual issues. One of the most notable aspects of both S.H.I.E.L.D's and North's approaches to the Fantastic Four was their willingness to address contemporary social and political concerns while still maintaining the series' classic sense of optimism and wonder. Both writers found ways to incorporate discussions of current issues without turning the series into a political platform or compromising its essential entertainment value. Environmental concerns were addressed through storylines that showed the team dealing with the consequences of climate change, pollution, and resource depletion. These stories were handled with scientific accuracy and genuine concern for environmental issues, while also providing opportunities for exciting adventures and character development. Social justice themes were incorporated through the team's interactions with diverse communities and their responses to inequality and discrimination. The series' long history of promoting tolerance and understanding was continued and updated for contemporary contexts, showing how the classic values of the Fantastic Four remained relevant to current social challenges. Technology and privacy concerns were explored through storylines that dealt with surveillance, artificial intelligence, and the potential misuse of scientific discoveries. These themes were particularly relevant to Reed Richards' character, as his inventions and theories often raised questions about the responsibility that comes with advanced knowledge and capability. The series also addressed family and relationship concerns that reflected contemporary understanding of psychology and interpersonal dynamics. The characters' conflicts and resolutions were portrayed in ways that felt emotionally authentic and psychologically realistic, while still maintaining the heightened drama that was appropriate for superhero storytelling. Educational and scientific literacy themes were woven throughout both runs, with stories that encouraged readers to be curious about the natural world and to value scientific thinking and evidence-based reasoning. The series served as an ambassador for science education, showing how scientific knowledge could be both exciting and socially beneficial. As the Fantastic Four move forward into their 7th decade of publication, the series has proven its resilience and enduring appeal through multiple creative transitions, corporate upheavals, and cultural changes. The successful return of the characters, after their 3-year absence, demonstrated that there remains a significant audience for well-crafted stories about Marvel's first family. The current era of Fantastic Four comics has succeeded in balancing respect for the series' classic elements with contemporary storytelling sensibilities and current social concerns. The characters remain recognizable and true to their essential natures, while also evolving and growing in ways that reflect the passage of time and changing cultural contexts. The series' influence on the broader Marvel universe remains significant, with the characters continuing to play important roles in cosmic storylines and serving as scientific and moral resources for other heroes. Their expertise and experience make them natural leaders and advisors within the superhero community, while their family bonds provide a model for other team relationships. The educational and inspirational value of the Fantastic Four remains as relevant today as it was when the series debuted in 1961. The characters continue to promote scientific curiosity, family loyalty, and social responsibility in ways that resonate with readers of all ages and backgrounds. Looking toward the future, the Fantastic Four appear to be well positioned to continue their role as one of Marvel's premier properties. The solid foundation established by recent creative teams provides a platform for future creators to build upon, while the characters' essential flexibility allows them to adapt to changing tastes and cultural contexts without losing their core identity. The series' greatest strength continues to be its focus on family relationships and the bonds that hold people together through extraordinary circumstances. As long as creators remember that the Fantastic Four are a family first and superheroes second, the series will likely continue to find audiences who are hungry for stories about love, loyalty, and the courage to explore the unknown together. As we reach the end of our long journey through more than 60 years of Fantastic Four history, certain enduring themes emerge that have remained constant despite all the changes in creators, artistic styles, and cultural contexts. These are the ideas and values that have made the series not just entertaining but meaningful and inspiring to generations of readers who have found in Marvel's first family a reflection of their own hopes, fears, and dreams. The most fundamental theme, of course, is family itself, not just the biological connections between Reed and Sue and Johnny, but the chosen family bonds that include Ben Grimm and extend to the broader community of friends and allies who have supported the team throughout their adventures. The Fantastic Four have always demonstrated that family is about more than genetics. It's about commitment, loyalty, and the willingness to sacrifice for those you love. The relationship between science and humanity forms another central theme that has evolved and deepened over the decades. Reed Richards' scientific genius has always been portrayed as both a blessing and a burden, capable of solving incredible problems but also creating new ones through unintended consequences. The series has consistently argued that scientific knowledge without wisdom and compassion is dangerous, while also celebrating the potential of human intelligence to improve the world. The concept of exploration and discovery has remained central to the Fantastic Four's appeal throughout their history. Whether they're investigating alternate dimensions, traveling to alien worlds, or simply trying to understand the cosmic forces that gave them their powers, the characters embody humanity's drive to push beyond known boundaries and seek new understanding of the universe around them. The theme of responsibility has grown more complex and nuanced over the years, but it has never disappeared. The Fantastic Four have always understood that their powers come with obligations to use them wisely and for the benefit of others. This responsibility extends beyond simple crime fighting to include scientific research, education, diplomacy, and the preservation of knowledge and culture for future generations. Perhaps most importantly, the series has always maintained an underlying optimism about human nature and the potential for positive change. Even in their darkest moments, even when facing cosmic threats or personal tragedies, the Fantastic Four have never lost their faith in the possibility of a better tomorrow. This optimism has made them unique among superhero teams, setting them apart as representatives of hope rather than merely agents of justice. The Fantastic Four's role as the foundation of the Marvel Universe cannot be overstated. They were not just the first successful Marvel superhero team, they established the template for how Marvel characters would relate to each other and to the world around them. The concepts, characters, and storytelling approaches introduced in their series became the building blocks for everything that followed. The cosmic scope that Lee and Kirby brought to the Fantastic Four expanded the possibilities for all Marvel characters, showing that superhero stories could encompass everything from street-level crime to multiversal threats. Characters like Galactus, the Silver Surfer, and the Inhumans became part of the broader Marvel mythology, enriching countless other series and storylines over the decades. The scientific foundation of the Fantastic Four's adventures established Marvel as the publisher most willing to engage with genuine scientific concepts and theories. Reed Richards' inventions and discoveries created technologies and possibilities that other Marvel characters could build upon, while his scientific approach to problem-solving influenced how other heroes would approach their own challenges. The family dynamic pioneered by the Fantastic Four became a model for other Marvel teams, from the X-Men's surrogate family structure to the Avengers' extended relationships. The idea that superheroes could have complex personal relationships with each other, rather than simply being professional colleagues, became a defining characteristic of the Marvel approach to team books. The integration of the Fantastic Four into a shared universe, where their actions had consequences for other characters and their stories intersected with broader events, established the template for modern comic book continuity. The Marvel Universe as we know it today began with Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben, and their influence can still be felt in every corner of that fictional reality. Beyond their importance to comic book history, the Fantastic Four have had a significant impact on American popular culture and the broader global conversation about science, technology, and human potential. The characters have appeared in multiple forms of media, inspired countless creators, and influenced how we think about everything from space exploration to family relationships. The series' promotion of scientific literacy and curiosity has had educational value that extends far beyond entertainment. Multiple generations of readers have been inspired by Reed Richards' dedication to knowledge and discovery, leading some to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. NASA scientists have cited the Fantastic Four as an influence, and the series has been used in educational contexts to make science more exciting and accessible to young people. The representation of strong family bonds in the face of extraordinary challenges has provided comfort and inspiration to readers dealing with their own family difficulties. The Fantastic Four have shown that families can overcome conflicts, adapt to changes, and support each other through even the most impossible circumstances. Their example has helped countless readers understand the importance of communication, forgiveness, and unconditional love. The series' approach to diversity and inclusion, while sometimes imperfect by contemporary standards, was often progressive for its time and helped advance conversations about tolerance and acceptance. The Fantastic Four's interactions with characters of different races, species, and backgrounds consistently promoted the idea that difference should be celebrated rather than feared. The visual innovations pioneered by artists like Jack Kirby, John Byrne, and others working on the series have influenced not just comic books but animation, film, and other visual media. The dynamic page layouts, creative panel arrangements, and spectacular action sequences developed for Fantastic Four comics have become part of the visual vocabulary of popular culture. What makes the Fantastic Four truly special, and what has allowed them to survive and thrive through more than 6 decades of publication, is their fundamental humanity. Despite their incredible powers and cosmic adventures, they remain recognizable as people dealing with universal human concerns. The challenges of maintaining relationships, the desire to understand their place in the universe, and the struggle to balance personal needs with public responsibilities. Reed Richards, for all his scientific genius, is still recognizable as the driven professional who sometimes becomes so absorbed in his work that he neglects his family relationships. His character arc over the decades has been about learning to balance his intellectual curiosity with his emotional obligations, a struggle that resonates with anyone who has tried to maintain work-life balance in a demanding career. Sue Storm's evolution from supporting character to powerful hero in her own right reflects the changing role of women in society, while also providing a model for personal growth and self-actualization. Her journey from the invisible girl to the invisible woman mirrors the experiences of countless women who have had to fight for recognition and respect in their personal and professional lives. Johnny Storm's development from impulsive teenager to mature adult has provided a template for growing up in the public eye while maintaining your essential character and values. His story shows that it's possible to become more responsible and thoughtful without losing the enthusiasm and energy that make life exciting and meaningful. Ben Grimm's acceptance of his physical transformation and his ability to find love and friendship despite his changed appearance speaks to anyone who has had to deal with disability, disfigurement, or other challenges that make them feel different from those around them. His character demonstrates that external appearance doesn't determine internal worth, and that true friends and family will love you for who you are rather than how you look. As we look toward the future of the Fantastic Four, there's every reason to be optimistic about their continued relevance and appeal. The fundamental concepts that make them special, mythos, family, exploration, scientific discovery, and hope for the future, are timeless themes that will always resonate with human audiences regardless of cultural or technological changes. The series' flexibility has been demonstrated repeatedly over the decades, as different creative teams have found new ways to explore familiar characters and concepts. The Fantastic Four can work equally well in intimate family dramas and cosmic adventures, in hard science fiction and fantasy stories, in serious explorations of social issues and light-hearted comedic tales. This versatility ensures that future creators will always be able to find fresh approaches to the characters. The ongoing expansion of the Marvel Universe into multiple forms of media provides new opportunities for the Fantastic Four to reach broader audiences and inspire new generations of fans. While their comic book adventures will always be their primary home, their appearances in films, television shows, video games, and other media can introduce the characters to people who might never otherwise encounter them. The educational and inspirational value of the Fantastic Four becomes more important rather than less, as our world becomes increasingly dependent on scientific and technological solutions to complex problems. The character's example of using knowledge and ability for the benefit of others provides a positive model for how we might approach challenges like climate change, disease, poverty, and social inequality. Perhaps most importantly, the Fantastic Four's message of hope and optimism feels especially relevant in times of uncertainty and division. Their demonstration that different people can work together toward common goals, that problems can be solved through intelligence and cooperation, and that the future can be better than the present, provides a vision of possibility that our world desperately needs. As our journey through the complete history of the Fantastic Four comes to an end, we're left with more than just memories of great stories and memorable characters. We're left with a sense of what's possible when human creativity, intelligence, and compassion work together toward worthy goals. The Fantastic Four have always been about more than superhero adventures. They've been about the bonds that hold families together, the curiosity that drives scientific discovery, the courage required to explore the unknown, and the hope that sustains us through difficult times. These themes have remained constant throughout their long history, providing anchor points of meaning and value that transcend the specific details of individual storylines. In Reed Richards' dedication to knowledge and understanding, we see the best of human intellectual achievement. In Sue Storm's balance of strength and compassion, we see the potential for leadership that serves others rather than dominating them. In Johnny Storm's enthusiasm and energy, we see the importance of maintaining wonder and excitement about life's possibilities. In Ben Grimm's loyalty and courage, we see the values that make true friendship and family bonds unbreakable. Together, these four characters have shown us that the greatest adventures are the ones we share with those we love, that the most important discoveries are the ones that help us understand ourselves and each other, and that the most meaningful achievements are the ones that make the world a little better for everyone. So as you drift off to sleep, let yourself dream not just of cosmic rays and fantastic powers, but of the simpler miracles that the Fantastic Four represent, the miracle of a family that chooses to stay together through everything, the miracle of minds that never stop questioning and exploring, the miracle of hearts that never stop hoping for a better tomorrow. Dream of the Baxter Building reaching toward the stars, of the fantastic car soaring over the skyline of New York, of adventures that begin with scientific curiosity and end with deeper understanding of what it means to be human. Dream of a universe where intelligence and compassion work together, where differences are celebrated rather than feared, and where every new discovery opens the door to even greater wonders. The Fantastic Four have been exploring the infinite possibilities of existence for more than 60 years, and their journey is far from over. There are still worlds to discover, problems to solve, and stories to tell about the eternal human desire to reach beyond our current limitations and become something greater than we imagined possible. In the end, that's what makes the Fantastic Four truly fantastic, not their powers, not their adventures, but their unwavering belief that tomorrow can be better than today, that love is stronger than fear, and that the greatest journey of all is the one we take together with those who matter most to us. Rest now and dream of fantastic tomorrows, secure in the knowledge that somewhere in the Marvel universe, Marvel's first family continues their eternal mission of exploration, discovery, and hope. The story never really ends here. It just pauses between issues, waiting for the next great adventure to begin. Sweet dreams, true believers. The future is fantastic and it's waiting for all of us to help create it.